Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. I am your host, Chris George Zuger, and you have entered the Den of Lore. Please do grab yourselves a glass of scotch, pull your chair up to the fire, because we are going to learn some really cool shit tonight, courtesy of none other than Gordon White. And again, this is episode 39, originally broadcasting on the 25th of May, 2017. And to my right, or across the table from me, is not Big Sexy Alex. He is unfortunately away due to work today. And we're starting late because I had work today, which is still apparently ongoing. But across the table is a good old friend of mine, and who's also a fan of Gordon, so I invited him in here. It is Big Sexy Nico tonight.
Hello.
Big Sexy Nico.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just turn up. You make sure you're talking into the front. You have to turn the microphone a little on that side.
How's this?
That's better. Thank you very much. And just for everyone who is out there, I'd like to say thank you very much to our patrons. You are the reason that we can do the show week in, week out. And, if you want to be able to support the show, you can go to patreon.com and /Den of Lore. As well as you can also go to denoflore.com /support. And if you'd like to donate to the show and ensure that we can continue to keep the lights on, pay for the internet, and, make sure that we can keep things cost neutral so that my wife will allow me to continue doing this show on a weekly basis. But to our patrons, I'd like to say a special thank you, specifically naming, we've got Joshua Maddock, Ellen McCurdy, Doug Keenan, Mark Catalano, Venice from Magical Egypt, and Sentient. You are the reason we can do the show, and again, I would like to thank you yet again, as we do every single episode, for your contributions and support. And for Joshua and Ellen, they are in the Masters Program. Now, what the Masters Program allows you to do is you get all the perks that are on Patreon, but you also do get one bonus episode a month, which we're actually going to be doing this Saturday. So again, if you'd like to support the show and get some cool stuff, please do check that out. And also don't forget to check out shop.denoflore.com. Now, I'm going to turn the webcam on here, and I'm kind of a little bit off screen, but that is fine. If you're listening on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or TuneIn Radio, you can't see me anyway, so that is fine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're probably wondering why I'm wearing not my usual hat. That is because the Senators are actually playing the Pittsburgh Penguins in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Final for the NHL playoffs. For they're in the race for the cup, and they lose whenever I don't wear the hat, so I'm wearing the hat tonight. And again, Crosby, if you do listen to this, or Malkin, get fucked, you whiny bastards. I'm just starting right out of the gate. Now, normally I'd be going on, pretty lengthy tirade for this episode, or for about like half an hour on the show, but I know that we're starting a little late. But I just wanted to let all the listeners out there know that we are going to be having our sandwich update after the show. So after we're done talking to Gordon, stick around. Because Denver Michaels will be joining us, even if I have to corral him around from somewhere, and we're going to get all of the sandwich updates for the Send Denver Michaels a Sandwich contest, which you can go check out at denoflore.com. The main page, scroll right to the bottom, and there's an update for there if you want all the information, and as well as the information is in the show notes of this YouTube event. Now, for the ladies and gentlemen out there, I'm going to be introducing our guest. And this is somebody I wanted to have on the show for quite a while, and for at least ever since I heard him on Grimerica, and I've been going through his podcast, Rune Soup, with Abandon. And this is Gordon White. And Gordon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for the invitation.
It is an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you on the show, as I tell all of our guests, but especially for you. I even put on my special vest, which I know you can't see at the moment, but I can assure you I'm wearing my special vest for you. And for all the ladies and gentlemen out there, again, Gordon is Australian by birth. Gordon's White family has a strong connection to the wider South Pacific thanks to his grandfather's experience in colonial administration in Nauru and New Guinea. He spent much of his early years exploring and divining in Micronesia, Melanesia and Polynesia. Gordon first became interested in Western occultism at the age of 13, following a series of intense dream experiences, and this interest became a lifelong pursuit. His esoteric leanings found an inspirational overlap with his exploration of the Pacific, following the publication of Graham Hancock's classic Fingerprints of the Gods, kind of the same direction I went in. Awesome book. This led him to study documentary production at a university level, film an underwater documentary about Nan Madol, that is awesome, and then go on to work for BBC Magazine, Discovery Channel, and news media companies in both hemispheres. After moving to London, he held senior data and analytics position in global media companies, as well as starting a chaos magic blog and podcast called Rune Soup, which ultimately led to the publication of his first 3 books, which were the Chaos Protocols, Starships, and a Prehistory of the Spirit, and Pieces of 8. Over the course of his journey, Gordon has had the privilege of speaking to some of the world's leading authorities in astrology, religious studies, genetic research, hermeticism, psi research, and the history of Western magic and ufology. The overriding mission of his work is an attempt to cohere an evidence-based Western magical worldview that combines history, paranormal research, the best available scientific research, and ufology, which is what we are all about here in the Den of Lore. So, Gordon, thank you very much for joining us. It's kind of one of those things. We've been waiting 6 months to have you on here. We have a little bit of technical difficulties beforehand and trying to get caught up. And one of the things that I don't necessarily hear from you is from many of the podcasts that I've listened to, and maybe you've touched on it, is your dream experiences. I don't think you've ever talked about those. So I'd really like to kind of delve into what that experience was like and how that kind of opened you up to more of the esoteric teachings.
Sure. Well, the reason the details are a little bit light on in that description, which from memory I think I wrote for Richard Hoagland, was I don't recall what actually happened. I was 13 and I woke up one Saturday morning with a sense of, well, that was really weird and intense. And, in the intervening several decades, it's kind of gone from me. But I woke up that morning and looked at how much money I had from refereeing soccer and stole some additional money from my mother's purse and walked down the hill to what we had at the time, which was an extremely good independent bookstore about 5 miles away, and bought a few books and went and also bought myself a underage packet of cigarettes and went and sat in the grandstand of the nearby rugby field and read these books that I'd got and smoked, and that was it. That was where it began. And I was aware that the dreams had been odd. I had what you might call sort of hag attack, night terror type things as a child. So at about the 6 or 7, I've always had really interesting and terrifying dream experiences that did include paralysis and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure if it was something like that, but it was just a particularly intense dream experience that then kind of just woke me up and off I went.
And with your esoteric leanings, you lean more towards the chaos, like the more the magical side, like the straight mysticism. I know within my experience, I had somewhat of a similar awakening, which I think I've probably gone into detail on the show on several episodes after several glasses of scotch. But I went more the like the practical side. And it always interested me in terms of how that, the practical side. I'm a practicing Freemason. I'm a 32nd degree. And I always looked at more of the kind of like the magic within oneself and trying to kind of improve oneself. Whereas, at least whenever I've heard you talk about magic, it's been more of a how to try and affect the world around you. How have you...
Well, wouldn't that make yours the mysticism and mine the practical?
Well, to a certain extent, you actually, yeah.
Yes.
Son of a gun. Well, there you go. Yeah, I'm just like, shit. Well, there goes my argument on that one. How did you first get like into practicing magic as a whole, and like what was your kind of entry point?
Well, of these sort of ill-gotten books that I read as an early teenager, they were let's be honest, they were terrible. The kind of things you can get in regional Australia in the early 90s were not very good. Nevertheless, when I had the house to myself, I grew up with two brothers in a family of both a mother and a father, but fairly actively social group. So I was on my own, and I did one of the rituals out of one of these terrible books in the front yard. We lived on a hill that kind of overlooked and out towards the beach, so it's actually quite a nice aspect for it. And I'd arranged these stones into a circle and did this summoning. And as I was putting the stones together, and as I sort of drew breath to start the invocation, there was a rustle in the long grass, which in Australia is a terrifying prospect, let me just say, because everything here kills you. But there was a rustle in the grass, and the grass morphed in shape. Visually, this wasn't kind of like seeing with one's inner eye. Morphed kind of like in the early Predator films, where Predator has the that digital camouflage thing, into the shape of essentially a little person, so some sort of fairy thing, and that was it for me. It was off to the races. There's something about this stuff that works. So my first experience, and I was terrified, because it's interesting to think about and talk about magic and its history, and you can think your way to, yes, okay, this works, and yes, this is aspects of this have kind of tumbled down in different forms from at least classical Alexandria, and all that makes sense. But then when you actually do it, if it's the first time you've ever done something that is very much outside your previous experience and what is generally considered socially acceptable, it's still an intense process to go through. So I was terrified as I was putting these things together, and that was it for me. It wasn't anything I invoked at all. Like, I hadn't even really begun. I'd arranged the circle, but it worked.
And normally when somebody's talking about like rustling in the long grass, and I know in Australia, everything, pretty much can kill you. Spiders, like I can't go visit my sister with my wife because she's like, there's spiders there, they're huge and they will kill you. Like, don't.
Also, the small ones kill you. It's not just the large ones.
Oh, that too. Mostly around Sydney, from what I can understand. Melbourne, they're kind of more bogan spiders. They're they make a lot of noise, but they're not really much trouble. Nowadays, it's more like you hear rustling in the grass, you're thinking, shit, is there a Pokemon in there? Like, you get your app open, throw a few Pokeballs at it. If you're, like that type of summoning, like this is something similar to like, is this something similar to like what King Solomon would do, like in terms of, or were you just trying to make something appear and it just happened?
That would be really nice if it was King Solomon. It wasn't. The books I were reading, I can't actually remember which, but they were paperback Wiccan neo-pagan books that everyone tends to begin with, that are, because they're widely available, that are essentially approaching 100% incorrect about their own history and best practice and so on. So it would be nice to say it was something King Solomon would do, but the only sort of Solomonic components to it really were the use of the circle. But yeah, it was. This is potentially an interesting thing about it. If I look back 20 years later, after 20 years of taking this stuff very seriously, everyone looks back on their first kind of experience going, that could have been a lot better, and it nevertheless worked. And more interestingly, perhaps it worked accidentally. Like, I'm quite sure it was probably just some sort of self-dedication or something like that. But nevertheless, it had a manifestation effect that I didn't deliberately cause with the use of magic, but at least the sort of embodiment of ritual, of just the simple process of laying these things out.
And your initiation, like, have you been initiated into any like magical circles or mystery schools, or has your path been strictly self-initiation?
Well, that's probably where initiation and I parted ways. I certainly haven't been involved officially in any groups. In the Chaos Protocols, I think ritual in a group sense is either, when it's done wrong, it's a synthetic version of something that should happen organically. And if it's done right, it's sort of an after the fact commemoration of something that can't really happen in that group setting anyway. So one of the earlier chapters in Chaos Protocols is called Becoming Invincible. And for me, the practice of magic is binary. You have to have an inciting incident that is sufficiently extreme, and that can be either good or bad for you to sort of realize permanently. Not that this isn't, when you say it's all in your head or you're imagining it, let's leave those terms undefined, because I think that's a cop-out answer anyway. But you have to have an event of that's sufficiently extreme for you to realize that the world is strange and haunted and not what you were told growing up. And magic's binary. So once you've done that, the decision is, well, do I choose to explore and work with this new understanding, or do I not? Or do I just live in a magical universe? And either of those things are fine. It's certainly not for everyone. But for me, that's everything after that is qualitatively rather than quantitatively different.
It's interesting you say binary, because when I got into Freemasonry originally, I'd always looked at mysticism, whether you're talking esoteric tradition or whether you're talking magic. I looked at it from a binary standpoint, and again, I could be way off and wrong on this, and I probably am still thinking it from a binary standpoint. But I always looked at it from, or at least discovered at one point, that it's, at least from a Masonic standpoint, it's tertiary, or a trinity, as it were, where you've got the rude material that you're coming from, or at least what I kind of term the chaos, that matter that you're starting with, and you've got the end point that you're envisioning that you want to make the effect happen, and then you have your own intelligence or your own self or being to carry it through from one to the other. And the idea that it was binary, I realized, okay, well, you've got the 2 points. You've got your starting point and your end point, but the intelligence to be able to carry things through, that is the third component that at least I'd kind of figured out, or to myself, that was necessary. Is this, what would your kind of opinion be on that perspective?
Yeah, that's perfectly valid. By binary, I don't mean the process. Okay. I mean, it's night and day. One day you live in a materialist universe, and then after whatever particular experience, you don't. And you have to have I've used this phrase before, but I'm going to use it again. You have to have an experience that's sort of sufficiently extreme or arresting that there's no getting the toothpaste back into the tube after that. And that's more or less what I mean by binary. What you've described there is another way of describing what I'm talking about. For me, it has an unnecessary level of complexity, because it can be an extreme UFO event. The example I use in the book is you can conduct a seance in an abandoned mental hospital, and you'll know you're alive when you do something like that, and it is enough to stay with you for the rest of your life. The principal goal, why it's called Becoming Invincible, is you have to have an experience that makes you realize that when your physical form ends, you don't. And that changes the game. That changes the game for how you live the rest of your life. And it changes the game for how you engage with the rest of your life, if you're, so drawn to things like magic.
What could you say to someone who is struggling with accepting that the universe is not as it appears, as it seems, as we are taught?
Well, it appears magical to me. So if you mean as is taught, there's, as I said, there's a number of ways you can do it. Find yourself a reputable shaman in South America, and you can do it that way. You can also, and this is for people who are more intellectually inclined, you can, and this I find interesting from a Pascal's wager perspective, and I'll explain that. You can take a week off work and read about 5 or 6 different books that kind of explore and summarize the last 120 years or so of laboratory experiments and psi research and things and processes conducted and observed under rigorous scientific conditions that show that side effects are real, telepathy works, there is some form of after-death communication, all this kind of stuff is there available for people to read. And you can just spend a week and reading these books and just kind of thinking your way to it. And why I call that a variant of Pascal's wager is Pascal was not trying to work out if he needed to believe in God and whether it was worth sacrificing his Sundays. And this is sort of a story that's tied into the emergence of probability as a sort of field of mathematics. And he kind of looked at it and said, well, if it's true, giving up a few Sundays for eternal life of bliss, it's the sort of development of risk analysis. If it's true, it's probably worth going to church on Sundays. And if it's not true, I'm going to be dead anyway and I won't know. But it was that sort of realization that something that you can kind of approach this logically and come to a reasoned conclusion. I find fascinating. And I what potentially is more fascinating to me is that more people won't. Like, honestly, can you not take a week off work on your vacation? I don't just mean ring up and call in sick for a week, although you could. Can you not just take a week off work and read these books when you consider what the implications of this information or these data are? Surely that's more important if you're working out the value of your life and how long you presume you're going to exist for. And I kind of give people the bookish option, but I would prefer, because it doesn't go away, I would prefer the other option, which is go and have some sort of extreme experience. And again, extreme can be benign, but it needs to be sufficiently potent.
I've heard you speak a lot about UFO experiences, at least in certain podcasts that I've listened to, and I know you've had a couple of episodes with regards to otherworldly, whether it's extraterrestrial or whether it is extra dimensional. What types of experiences have like that? That's a pretty extreme experience if you think about it. Like if from people who have had alien abductions, or if they've dealt with ghosts, or if they've dealt with some type of demonic presence or possession, that changes people. What have you yourself, like, have you run into anything yourself as far as, like, besides the one that got you going, like in terms of UFO or alien experiences? What have you gone through?
I have not seen any little lights in the sky or anything UFO-wise. I have certainly seen entities of different forms, physical, like the one I described.
Mm-hmm.
Australia is a surprisingly haunted place, or potentially unsurprisingly, in a way that they're quite extreme and old and hostile, some of these beings that you can encounter. And there are some really scary places. I mean, it's we have the oldest continually practiced cultures on Earth here, and it's the first continent broken away from Gondwana and so on. So it's Cthulhu's summer home, because it's obviously warm as well. It's intense in that way. So you end up having those kind of regional Australian encounters. There was a fascinating one in a friend's house when we were growing up, and he lived in a sort of peninsula that jutted out into a lake, and it was a 120-year-old house, and we were underage drinking because his father was away, and I was walking through the house and coming down the hallway, and you turn left to go into the living room, but the hallway kind of continued on for a part, so you sort of turn left and you see about a 6-foot length of hallway out of the corner of your right eye, and then it stops at a wall, and there was this elongated glowing being that was too tall for the 120-year-old, so quite high ceilings. It was sort of hunched over in the corner there, and it was the culmination of some very eerie experiences in that house, which my friend never enjoyed actually living in, because it was scary like that. And so sometimes you see them with your naked eye, but I've never had a classic UFO experience. And generally the process of magic, particularly in an evocation sense, requires you to keep doing something like an invocation until something shows up. And that can be a presence in the room, as it most commonly is, but it can also be more than that.
And what is it about these, these extreme experiences which open, which open the esoteric eye? I'm going to say for some people. One of the big things with UFO experiencers or abduction experiences is that they at least either claim or actually become psychic as a result, or they've somehow untapped that part of their mind or brain that allows them to either foresee or read thoughts is there a particular, I'm gonna want to say, like mechanism that is in play here?
Presumably, I'm not entirely sure. You get similar things happening with those who've experienced near-death experiences or so on, and it's one of the things that Jacques Vallée observed from the '60s, that there is a long-term life impact of people having these UFO experiences that is odds on, so more often than not, actually benign, however, or beneficial rather, however traumatic the incident was, in terms of, again, coming to these realizations that life continues after death, or that the human is more than more than its physical form, and so on. So presumably, and you can kind of typologically look back through history around the world and see similar things in the role of, angelic encounters or spirits or spirit guides or any of that kind of thing. You find this encounter with the other side of what Dr. Kreipel might call the one-way mirror. The encounter with that is associated with this sort of enhanced human capacities, and that just appears to be baked into the lasagna. That's how it works.
Sorry, you were going to say something, Nico?
Oh, I was not. I was just giggling.
We do that a lot on this show, and it's not just because of the scotch. I swear. With that type of experience opening people's minds, and I know some people will go the route of going towards the mysticism and more of the shamanic style of teachings or way of life, and you've got the other side, which leads people down that rabbit hole of trying to discover the lost, either lost civilizations, or they just get really into conspiracy theories. What is kind of your experience within magic after the fact? Like you've been practicing for some time, or at least have been interested in it for some time. If you have gone from summoning as your first experience to the wide range of experiences you've had now, what kind of brought you more towards the chaos magic side and sigils?
The chaos magic books, the sort of early ones that Wisery printed, so Pete Carroll's books, Liber Null and Psychonaut, and Liber Chaos in particular, were readily available. So it was when I found them, and this was on my kind of ongoing process once I started, after I'd stolen money from my mother to buy the books and got away with it, I did it again. And some of these books, well, Pete's books were some of the earliest ones I read that I didn't find to be confusing boomer hippie nonsense, and it was just a good match for me. It was the right time. I mean, chaos magic was, I guess, culturally prominent in the mid-90s, and so it seemed to be a good match. But if you know anything about Pete Carroll, you know that he did hard sciences at university, and so there's something about that particular perspective, although we don't have at all, because this is chaos magic, it's not like we have the same worldviews, but there's something about his attitude and rigor when it comes to getting results, which is the pro of chaos magic as well as its shortcoming, that really resonated. So it's sort of been baked in since then. I mean, potentially there's an aspect of you dance with the one what brung you in it, but chaos magic for me has always been the home base that I think is best suited and most adequate to explorations of other forms of magic, but also just other fields of interest, as you mentioned, quote unquote conspiracy theory or ufology or so on. Chaos magic gives you a nice and useful meta approach to analyzing different cosmologies and different metaphysics, and hopefully being able to separate out things like data and interpretation.
And exactly how does chaos magic work?
I don't know.
Sorry, a better question, I should say, and that's probably a very simplistic way of looking at it. Your standard magic practices. I know that there are, you've got your drawing circles and your designing sigils or larger patterns on either paper or on a floor or what have you, and incantations. You've got your either talismans or rituals for lack of a better word. Where chaos magic, I've seen it described, and I've had it described on the show as it is essentially magic that you kind of perform ad hoc as needed, the way that you want it to do, to be able to create an effect. You kind of like manifest stuff as you want it, doing it the way that you want, which seemed a little bit open-ended to me. But again, maybe that description was wrong.
It is.
Okay.
Simple as that. Chaos magic began through some fairly iconoclastic experimentation before the word was there of some British magicians initially in northern London and then in actual northern England. And Pete gave it the term chaos magic because if you remember, James Gleick's book on chaos mathematics was out at the time, and said, well, we'll just call it this. It's genuinely as arbitrary as that. But what they were attempting to solve, and it's the most boring inside baseball stuff, is the general moribund state of esotericism in Britain in the early 80s, particularly amongst sort of Crowleyan orders. And so it was an attempt to say, well, we have these hypotheses about how this might work, so let's experiment with it. Things you don't need initiation, yes or no. Can you call these forms? Do you have to pronounce them correctly? Yes or no. Can you swap things out for, mythological examples to fictional examples and get it to work? And that was the general idea of it. But the point wasn't you can do whatever you want whenever you feel like it. It's kind of the opposite. Chaos magic is, if you don't get the results, you have failed. Now, it's simple as that. And that's good and bad because honestly, there are tremendous ontological and epistemological shortcomings to focusing on physical observed results in any metaphysical field. It works. It's necessary but not sufficient as a component of how you value or ascertain success or not in any kind of endeavor. But nevertheless, it's there. And so doing whatever you want whenever you feel like it probably doesn't work as well as systematically examining and trialing different components of magical praxis to see which ones are potentially redundant and which ones aren't. And that in the 90s, when it kind of got away from its creators and got caught up in culture and had its American period, that's when that happened. This kind of, you can do anything. It's the sort of phase 2 of chaos magic with the sort of rise of internet relay chat and kind of dial up and let's all explore different things. It went decidedly too far in that direction and kind of collapsed into a mess. And what's happened, I would say, over the last 5 or so years is a recognition that yes, if you do things, if you swap out Apollo for Superman in some kind of solar rite, you will have at least psychological effects from it. But it works better if you use Apollo. Why is a very interesting question that I don't have an answer for. And so there's been a return to, based on that same chaos magic worldview, which does it work and will it get better or can I improve this? It appears that some of these older, more conserved forms, as in conserved through time, have probably been conserved for a reason, which is that they work better. And that's kind of where it's at the moment. So it's not necessarily a wandering off into popular culture, especially right now when popular culture is shit. It's a focus on that. Yeah, it's a focus on which things, and it's a singular focus. You can't hide in the mysticism, which you can in a lot of other magical practices. If you set out to do something and you don't get it, you failed. It's as simple as that. And that's really that's kind of Pete's core philosophy, and it's stark. I was going to say grim. It's not grim. It's stark, but for me, that's the core of chaos magic, and I've always liked that because it's kept me sane, even though I realize it is, as I said before, necessary but insufficient. You can't run your entire personal metaphysics on that on that sort of practical outcome basis, but you also can't hide your failures, and that's a really good thing to keep in tension.
And is there any relation to like chaos theory with mathematics with regards to dynamic systems and how they're, and how they are kind of susceptible to just outside forces within the or outside the system?
Yes and no. Mostly no, as because I asked Pete directly, like, where did it come from? And he said, I was reading James Gleick's book, Chaos Magic, and I liked the idea and I liked that model. And it is a kind of 80s early computing model. But that's where the term came from. So in that sense, it is. I have, in some respects, stuck with it. I've liked, as you kind of mentioned at the top of the show, my real career was around demography and data analysis and so on within a media context. So that's always just really resonated with me. So it's there for me. I like that. I like Nassim Taleb's work and that kind of thing, rather than maybe the kind of Jurassic Park chaos magic, which obviously I love because Jurassic Park is amazing. But rather than that, there is still that need for, can you optimize analysis and worldview? And the best tools we have for that at the moment are in that kind of stochastic, non-stochastic space.
And as far as worldview, like you're talking about interrelationship, are you talking about interpersonal? Is it more of just a kind of the grand energy wave that is apparently supposed to surround us and binds us together, like the Force type of thing?
It's tools. So it's these are quantifiable ways of interrogating reality, and fields like economics are night and day different, and history is a good example. Really, any field that relies on large volumes of data, if you haven't looked at it in the last 15 years, is completely different. And obviously a lot of the maybe more prominent worldviews in the magical space are 19th century. So they haven't looked at it. There weren't computers in the 19th century. And so that's more what it's about. It's, again, kind of finding those tools. There's what comes with the no excuses. Well, actually, failure's fine, but like what comes with the don't hide your failures attitude is a willingness to further optimize and find the best tool. In Pieces of 8, I describe chaos magic as a worldview optimized for optimization, and if you take it too far, it kind of is that. And again, that's what I mean by it's a shortcoming. That's not a very good macro worldview if you're trying to, comfort someone whose husband's just died. But it's a very useful way of being in the world if you're interested in changing it.
And how would something like this be used? And I'm thinking of my mother with this one, because I know that she occasionally goes to, we'll go to the local casino / gaming emporium that is near their house, and she will try slot machines. And I know that with slot machines, a lot of it's random. It's RNG. It's random number generation, and there can be a lot of it's a lot of chance because it's random numbers, but at the same time, it is a matter of being able to focus on the system or focus on the forces at hand to be able to affect that change at that kind of level. Like, how effective would it be I'm just using this as an example. How effective would it be at that level? And how could something like that be applied? And no, I'm not doing this so I can gamble. That would be... Well,
let's assume there's a 1 in 128,000 chance that your mother's going to get the largest amount, the $50,000 payout. She can apply practical magic in whatever forms she would like to reduce those odds. But if she reduces them from a 1 in 128,000 to 1 in 50,000, she's very good at magic and is still wasting her money. Because you just dropped it down to 1 in 50,000 chance. There's a way of looking at magic as a practical enchantment, at least, as a form of probability enhancement that is very useful for, if not explaining failure, then modeling it, which is the suggestion that it always works. Every single time it works. It works in reducing in increasing the likelihood of your preferred outcome. But if you're increasing from 1 in 128,000 to 1 in 50,000, your problem isn't with the application of practical enchantment, it's with your target selection. So that is one of the kind of things you can extract from, I guess, a worldview that not relies on, but is informed by probabilistic analysis.
Okay, I think I've got a pretty good grasp on that. And I'm trying to think, like, there's even a chance, the way that you're explaining it, that I've probably done it myself without necessarily realizing it. Or do you have to actively be attempting to apply it to the target that you're trying to affect?
No, I think everyone's doing it every second of the day, asleep and awake. I think there's something about, and this is more or less observed in physics, but there is something about the operation of human consciousness that is fundamentally tied to the emergence of reliable physical molecules from an unreliable quantum state. That's I think people are doing it all the time. I've previously described magic as a culture-specific way of exploring naturally occurring consciousness effects within humans, and I think that's reasonable. And I think that kind of goes alongside a probabilistic analysis, which is that I think we do it. I think everyone does it all the time, and magic is a culture-specific way of leaning into that, or to those naturally occurring facets of human consciousness.
So you would say that this is maybe a way of amplifying one's will or intention?
I don't like the will word, because I don't think you will molecules into being. I think I don't think the trouble with those words is that they emerge from worldviews that separate mind and matter in ways that I think is philosophically extremely naive. It's probably better to say it. I don't know how human consciousness and reality are either the same thing or involved with each other, but they are. And if we start to get to that kind of imposition of will, you're back into this kind of 19th century kind of boy magic, Crowley-ish way of doing things, which was sufficient for a time, but again is insufficient for kind of what we understand about the universe. All those ideas emerged, long before things like quantum physics or even worthwhile psychology and psychiatry and everything else. There are better ways of reorganizing updated pools of information into what I consider to be a more satisfying magical worldview. And
how does this, like, this sounds a little bit like quantum, like quantum physics, or kind of the spooky effect with if we're able to kind of affect an experiment that, if we're observing it, it's going to give one result. If we're not observing it, it's giving a different result. That sounds very similar to that same realm of physics, which Einstein kind of freaked out about because, well, as he said, God doesn't play dice with the universe. Was that?
Yeah, he was wrong. He was wrong about a lot of stuff. He also just declared by fiat that the ether didn't exist, and I think that was a disastrous mistake, and a lot of deep state technology has been hidden behind that idiotic curtain. It is, to go back to what you were saying about the quantum observation experiments, they are a subset of what we're talking about here, because one, they're observable, so yes, they're correct. But what has historically happened in the last 30 years is people have used that to explain magic, and it's not. What we're dealing with in that kind of blind man and the elephant way is telepathy and psychokinesis and other psi results and group mental intention effects on random number generators are all blind men, in addition to the blind man that is the quantum observation experiments on this kind of elephant, which is that mysterious way human consciousness and observable reality are either the same thing or intertwined.
And if we're talking about that type of intertwining, is this this is something that we've been had in culture for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years?
Yeah, absolutely. It's if you look at it, kind of coming back to the earlier point or question that Nico posed, like So even in Europe and North America now, a majority of people still we can bundle into at least spiritual, if not deliberately religious. So we're dealing with a minority of what is between 5 and 10% of the population thinking that the only things that exist are physical. So it's this kind of mental illness that affects a small fraction of the population over only the last handful of decades. But the rest of the world, through all of human time, didn't think that. And for some reason, largely thanks to how media and so on operates, that we've assumed that this mental illness that affects a minority of the contemporary population is the real thing, and 95% of mankind for all of human history are deluded, even though even within that subset, these people are having experiences that they can't properly explain. So yes, this is why you kind of have to have a wider definition of magic, is that culture-specific exploration of naturally occurring consciousness effects, because everyone else forever, the idea that you could pull someone out of a tribe in Africa, or go and get a Malaysian grandmother and have them sit down and have someone like Sam Harris with a straight face tell them that everything, like, you're just a bundle of atoms and your consciousness is an illusion. It's like, who is this lunatic talking to me? And that's essentially where once you've had that becoming invincible experience, they're really, really small, and you can kind of upend a shot glass and cover them with it, and then they just start to squeak.
Oh yeah, like the becoming invincible, where everyone has it at some point, and for some reason guys always think they have it when they're like 22, after they've had a lot to drink at the bar. They're like, they've had like 5 shots of tequila, they're like, I can destroy everything, and then some bouncer's just kicking their head in outside the club like 5 minutes later. And then you get guys who they just all of a sudden get into this flow, and they can, everything works for them. It's like the Fonzie effect, where you're just so cool and so hip and just so riding the wave that you can just like walk up to a jukebox and just hit it and get it working again, and that's it.
Well, flow's interesting, isn't it? Because we have all these pseudoscientific Vox and Salon style articles about how it works in a corporate setting or in an athletic setting, and these aren't good explanations for a thing that is not only observed, but is probably associated, I would suggest, with the emergence of hunting amongst humans 500,000 years ago. It's that same idea of being fully present, and it's a consciousness effect, fully present in such a way that you and the universe are rowing in the right direction in complete sync. And but if you try to look at the garbled, moronic explanations for how that might work with the kind of pseudoscience that sounds like people are talking about phlogiston or humors, or the kind of ways that it's described on Google campuses. The same thing with mindfulness meditation. You look at it and go, this stuff you're saying is less scientific than Jules Verne, but nevertheless the underlying effects are there, and that's where we're kind of in a situation of having like a fairly serious worldview dysfunction going on at the same time as the sort of re-emergence in the West of these kind of techniques and this sort of understanding.
Well, that's one of the interesting parts that I've found with a lot of experts and researchers. Like we've had Ross Hamilton on the show, which it was it was episode 9, so we're talking like within the first 2 months of the show. And he was mentioning that the kind of the spiritual center of the world shifts from either from civilization to civilization or epoch to epoch, and like right now it's currently sitting in India, and it's been in other parts of the world, but it's been apparently the idea is that it's supposed to be shifting back here towards North America at some point. And I could see there are a lot of people who are either waking up or they're becoming a lot more aware of themselves and the world around them on a fundamental and positive spiritual level, like not in a dogmatic sense, but they're at least starting to understand things that have been taught in eras past. And of course, at the same time, the rest of the world around them is just going to absolute shit, as we're seeing south of the border from. I'm in Canada. Like we get shit's kind of crazy here, but not really that crazy. In the States, shit's crazy, like very crazy. And there is that dichotomy where you've got the most amount of people who are looking at things from an alternatively spiritual sense than pretty much at any other point in history within the U.S. And at the same time, you've got the largest amount of general chaos that's happening at the exact same time. So how do we, or at least in your view, like what's the way to kind of bridge the gap, or at least have the positive take over the current the current descent into entropy?
I don't think it does. I think we're just in one of those sort of we're in an interregnum. It's America is not doing a very good job of moving into a multipolar world from a unipolar one. The last empire did a better job of it, at least in terms of the medium-term success for Britain as a country. We're not there. You're correct that, and it's actually a Pete Carroll observation from the 80s as well, but it works here. There are more sorcerers alive today on a nominal basis than there ever have been in history, just because there are so many people on the planet. But this is what happens when you get, literally chaos, but worldviews in a state of collapse and composting, which the materialist worldview, the neoliberal worldview, the fundamental promises of a kind of boomer-based capitalist civilization are all ending, and not ending very gracefully. And it's in that period that you get all these kind of alternative ideas. During the last days of the Roman Empire, or the fall of Rome, the city was lousy with soothsayers and wizards and so on. And you got the same thing with the kind of after the death of Victoria in London, at what was the peak before the sort of dramatic fall in terms of the scope of the British Empire. It's just what happens. We're in one of those moments. So I don't know how involved humans really are in the kind of big turning points in human history. I've been talking about on the blog for years psychoanalysis, and one of my favorite economists, Tyler Cohen, brought a book out this year in which he said, and this is kind of coming back to what I was talking about the impact of computing. Mm-hmm. It is essentially now looking like a cycles model is the best explanation for history, rather than a kind of positivist progressive one, which we kind of went with in the 20th century, that turned out to be wrong. And that is I'm glad he got there. I got there before him. Yay. But that is, he arrived at that opinion from looking at the data, and we're just in one of those turning points. We're just in this is the implication of a cycles model, and the question isn't, how do we steer it and make it better, or how do we make sure the good guys win? This too shall pass is sort of a better way of looking at the world. It's not an excuse for inaction. It's the opposite. It is a justification for right action, rather than an attempt to change your airline meal for something better while the plane is crashing.
That's a very good analogy. It's like I'm not sure how much travel you've done around Europe or between North America and Europe, but I've taken a trip to Portugal, and we flew Air Maroc, which is let's just say the food's not very good. It's okay, but you get that. Okay, if the plane's going good, you can change out that. I'm making, yes, Nico, I know you're looking at me strange, but I'm making a good analogy here. Just let me work it. If there was turbulence in the plane, I was shitting my pants, and it happened over the Atlantic a little more than I actually cared to have, even though it was clear skies. The food didn't come out until the turbulence was over. So, and I've been on some flights, I think it was one from Air Canada, again, never fly Air Canada, they're horrible, where they're serving drinks while the plane's pitching 15 degrees in either direction, up and down, and, dropping a couple 100 feet in bad weather. and they're like, oh, they're asking you all these options and all of these, they're trying to make you have choice where you're kind of worrying about is the plane gonna, is it gonna make it there, or am I gonna have some life altering things happen in the short order. And I'm seeing in the States that you've got a lot of individuals who are currently within that same kind of sphere where they're trying to make life choices, but everything around them has been changing so much. And how like, for instance, healthcare is changing there. So you've got individuals who are trying to make healthcare long-term choices for their finances, in addition to for the care of their children. There's a very good chance in 10 years they won't have insurance, or in the next 5 years they won't have insurance. So how is a person supposed to make that type of intelligent choice for their own life or for the lives of their loved ones when there's so much chaos going around? Or
Well, yeah. Well, no, it's a very good question, and it's a universal question. Step one is to realize that the worldviews that are on offer are ending, because it's not just the healthcare example is a very good one. The idea, I didn't think it was possible to make Obamacare worse, but apparently they found a way, right? Because we're in a situation where, because the replacement for it is so bad, people think, well, we should have kept Obamacare. And I'm like, no, most of, I think it's most of Mississippi has no insurers in the exchange. Like, both of these things are different kinds of wrong. And it kind of comes back to the plane analogy, which is, I appreciate that's a scary thought. It is where you are. So the game becomes, what can I do to assert sovereignty over health and healthcare, rather than kind of picking which do I want, the fish or the chicken, as this whole thing's going to collapse, because it will. And I actually think in the US they will end up with single payer probably in the next 5 years. So I don't mean it in a facetious way to say, please, dear Americans, just don't die in the next 5 years, because underneath that, once you've allegedly solved healthcare, so if you have something like, for all its many flaws, the NHS like Britain has, you're still stuck with a worldview, a medical worldview that is hugely dysfunctional, as far as I'm concerned, to say the least. The millions of people that are damaged by different medicines and inoculations and all this kind of stuff. The fundamental model there is wrong, psychiatrically, surgically. When it comes to the treatment of children, like, some really bad stuff is going on there. So making it free, well, not necessarily free, but taxpayer funded, doesn't solve the underlying premise, which is that medicine is a dysfunctional worldview, because it's a materialist one. And yet, at the same time as the collapse in the kind of private healthcare industry, not really collapse, they're actually ludicrously profitable, but let's say the collapse in affordability of the private healthcare industry in the US, you also have state after state after state legalizing marijuana. You have access to all these different things that, you'd be familiar, you're Canadians, with Rick Simpson. There are opportunities to potentially cure cancer for, like, legally, at the same time that cancer treatments are now profoundly unaffordable. And this is the kind of cycles model understanding that we need to think about, which isn't a small one, like this kind of left-right. Neither of these ideas are useful, because they essentially emerge out of 19th century arguments about how to organize an industrial economy. The idea that if you just we'll pick the left one this time or the right one, is not sufficient for what's coming. And weirdly, magic's very good at that. Magic is kind of omnivorous and ravenous when it comes to incorporating additional worldviews that I think quite simply are a better match for more chaotic times.
Nico, did you have anything to add to that one?
No, please continue.
Okay, well, with, like, we in Canada, we have we've got single payer. It's government healthcare. It's all done by province. It's paid into by the government, but the province takes care of it. And I know in Australia, it's essentially the same thing. We, I think, in Ontario are going to start having for a boon to the pharmaceutical companies. we're going to start having pharmaceuticals up to 25, I believe, which is going to be provided and paid for by the government, which, to a certain extent is great. If there are certain pharmaceuticals out there, and people are going to bash the pharmaceutical companies, and there's a lot of shit that they do that's pure evil, and profit driven, which they're a business, but still at the same time people depend on this stuff. But there are a lot of drugs out there that are beneficial to people,
Such as?
well, AIDS medication, if I'm not mistaken, which can extend people's lives by decades. Aspirin.
Aspirin. See,
It's
when
over
you
the
start
counter
to
right
get-
now.
Yeah. That's the point. The majority of them, like, there are worldview dysfunctions here, and I don't know how many people need the AIDS medication. Like, I'm not saying don't have it. What I mean is, you're correct. And funny enough, I just want to interrupt there, because when people look at Britain, when the Americans look at Britain and the NHS as if there is any such thing as government-funded healthcare, there isn't. What happens there is that instead of you keeping money for yourself and giving it to big pharma, what happens is your tax money goes in the front door of the hospital and out the back door into the big pharma companies there. It's the same, like, they get paid. It's the same, and that's kind of what I was implying with that there is a hugely dysfunctional worldview here, and a hugely dysfunctional kind of medical economy, and yeah. Anyway, sorry. Continue, because Australia is the same. You kind of can't get away from the fact that we are over medicated. We are medicated with extremely damaging things. What is it? 85%. For America, US has 5% of the world's population and consumes 85% of its psychotropic painkillers, like its prescription painkillers. They're not that sick. It's as simple as that. But we can't. Everyone will always either know or be the exception to the rule. Like, oh, but I have this condition. I'm like, yeah. Do you? I can't argue with the numbers here. I can't argue with the fact that the reason things like the TPP wanted to export the American model of healthcare to the world is that over-medicating America was very, very profitable. And there's the other 95% of the population waiting. And this is the kind of stuff I feel quite strongly about, because health is one of those things. The Buddha said this, but like, health is one of those things, he didn't quite say it like this, that you can't avoid. Like, there's no such thing. You can't not take a position on health. And the idea that taking a position on health is the equivalent to being in favor of the least worst government policy, it's not the same. Like, you need to kind of have an understanding, and magic's very good at this. It's been its whole job since the Paleolithic. Magic has been about asserting sovereignty over those health processes.
And this goes into kind of the idea of, not necessarily the placebo effect, but the placebo effect kind of works within that same kind of realm, where you have a medication that you're told will give you a certain effect, and you don't, like you're taking, let's say, something that's just a sugar pill, but you'll still get the effect that medication's supposed to provide without the actual active ingredient. And the idea is, well, how is your body able to do these things and able to affect these changes? The same idea, and I know that this may be a kind of a bad example, but like, at least an extreme example, you'll have individuals who they will undergo some type of extreme experience. Like I know with here in Canada we have like and I know that I've heard you discuss the Fatima before, and I've been to Fatima, to the shrine there, and massive. Oh my goodness, it's a massive place. But we have one of the top Catholic shrines here in Canada. It's about a 7-hour drive from here in Ottawa. It's, I think, about an hour and a half north east of Quebec City, called Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré, and it's a massive cathedral. And the idea is that people who are being afflicted by some type of crippling ailment, whether it's polio or their legs don't work or what have you, they will go there, and they will either they will pray or they'll perform what they're supposed to do as dictated by as custom, or and I forget exactly. I think it's like you have to walk up 100 stairs or something like that. But people apparently walk away from these debilitating conditions, completely cured. And it's a matter of, okay, well, is this a matter of is it faith? Is it I'm a believer in some type of higher power. I can't explain it to life. I mean, I don't think religion necessarily can, but there are people who are able to believe something and they'll affect change within themselves. So is this a matter of self-healing? Is it a matter of there are plants that can assist with these things, or is it a matter of just people just being lucky?
I think you roll the hard six slightly more often in a mystical or magical environment. I wasn't specifically referring to miraculous outcomes, which I think are more likely in the kind of conditions that we were just describing. I mean that, like, literally every single prescription medication is in some way a weaponized form of traditional plant lore or traditional medicine, except for the even more demonic ones that only end up on the market because you kind of top shelve the trials that you don't want out there. And I mean, Prozac literally does nothing. I don't know if you know who Dr. Ben Goldacre is, but the only reason Prozac came out was because they top shelved the results that showed that it did nothing. But that kind of sovereignty over, if you look at our more or less ruined food supply chain and a combination, now that we have this understanding of a pivot to things like local food and the kind of original sources and correct doses for plants that went on to become, like you mentioned aspirin, like willow tree bark then. So you make a tea of willow and it does the same thing, the same anti-inflammatory effect. A lot of these actual medical treatments have been conserved since the Paleolithic. So it's not just people go to placebo effect. The fact that you went straight to placebo effect suggests to me that you need to look again at the internalized medical worldview you have, because you think they're right, but there's also a miraculous response which is still there. But I mean it on a fundamental daily basis, that the majority of things that we are told we need, particularly in the US, because for some reason you're allowed to have TV advertising for experimental, recently released drugs that cause death as a side effect. That's not, that's not the right way to look at this, and it's you cannot get away from it. The food industry is essentially ruined from a health perspective. The same thing with big pharma, but nevertheless, we will get sick, and we need to eat.
Well, it's the age-old adage, like cure your eczema, but you can get cancer.
Basically, yeah. Well, because I used to go to the US for work quite a bit, and I'd be getting ready, to go into the office, and I'd sort of turn on morning TV, and in between the ads for Learjets on a morning talk show, for whatever reason, I'll tell you, it's so that they don't run negative articles about Boeing, because Boeing's putting ads in the show. I work in advertising, so I know what that's like. But then in between that, you get ads for the most absurd snake oil problems, like, I have my bowel movements are irregular in the morning, so here, take this, and then the list of side effects includes, like, temporary psychosis, and I'm like, wait, for irregular bowel movements, have a coffee. What the hell?
Coffee and a cigarette in the morning, it gets you going.
Yeah,
it gets you going. And that's the biggest thing for me with the pharmaceutical industry, is just because, yes, like I may bring that as an example, but in reality, a lot of, I'm going to say 99.9% of what's out there, it's invented conditions. It's, again, there are problems that people have, but it's a matter of, okay, is it completely made up that
we're talking about restless leg syndrome, right?
Well, yes, restless leg syndrome.
No, that's a serious issue. I think we should investigate more government money.
What one thing for me is, like, now that we like ADHD or ADD, they've got these new fidget spinners out. That is, that's a non-medical way to kind of attack the problem of people who have issues with attaining focus or being motivated or staying still at their desk. You just have this little thing that you just spin around. And if I had that when I was in college or I'm going to say in high school, I probably wouldn't have gone to smoking the Mary Jane. That was like grade 11 to graduation, but still, there are non-medical ways to attack a lot of the issues that are out there. And if you're dealing with cancer, like, that's a strange thing. I know people who have drank, done crazy stuff, and they've lived to be like 80, and they just lived this hedonistic lifestyle of debauchery and awesomeness. But they came to an end. I know people who are in their teens and they get some horrible form of rare cancer, and they've never smoked, they've never drank, they haven't even come out of their own, as it were. So there are a lot of, it's like, what, no one really knows what can cause these issues to a certain extent.
This is the worldview dysfunction that I was talking about with Big Pharma. So even if you solve to your own satisfaction, or if you vote to your own satisfaction for some kind of government policy to do with healthcare funding that you like the best, you're still left with, and I remember I follow the cancer stuff quite closely. In 2013 or 14, it was front page of The Guardian, recent study shows that getting cancer is essentially luck. They ran down the genetics, they ran down the lifestyle things, and they had to retract it the next day because all this kind of grumble medicine going, you can't tell people that, even though when it says luck, what it means is we, upon meta-analysis of the conditions surrounding 100,000 cancer cases over the last 40 years, we do not detect a pattern, is what they're saying. That means you're looking for the wrong thing. There clearly is one, and I suspect with cancer that it is the underlooked at vector is oncoviruses, which we, for decades, were told viruses are not implicated in cancer until they were, and we have HPV vaccines and so on for women. So for decades, it was viruses don't cause cancer, except for this one. And you go, well, hang on, let's just look back over the last dramatic rise of cancer since the mid-20th century and see if there's anything in this. But you can't do that. You personally can, and if there is an oncoviral vector, that puts the control and sovereignty back into your hands. But more interestingly, when it comes to cancer, and a lot of these sort of so-called unfair. The guy who won the Nobel Prize for Medicine last year, a Japanese doctor, he won it for essentially discovering what autophagy does and how you trigger it. And autophagy is essentially if you fast for more than 5 days, completely fast, so 7 days or more, your entire body will essentially destroy and remove damaged cells and so on, and flush them out. And you sort of re-lengthen your telomeres, and he won the Nobel Prize for this. And what do you know? It turns out that this has, like a 30-day fast combined potentially with something like Rick Simpson oil, you get dozens of anecdotal in the sense because no one's on any trial on it, but you get dozens of anecdotal accounts of people curing pets and livestock and themselves and so on who have been in this situation. And these things are available to you. And it's just, no one does it. But if you look at the official option, the one that can bankrupt you in the US, which is cancer treatment, you look at it and go, well, so what's on offer here? And you go, well, you take these drugs and then we blast you with radiation. Does it work? It's like, it appears it doesn't work. But nevertheless, this is your option, and it will cost you $70,000 to mortgage your house. And you go, this is some bullshit. It's as simple as that. And
well, exactly. Like, again, I'm going to bring this up here, and this isn't to toot our own our horn here, but you're aware of who John Anthony West is. Obviously, this isn't a foreign.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
So John Anthony West, as you know, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer late last year, and we've been helping as much as we can with his family and with his family friend Clay Roop to essentially raise money for him for cancer research. And again, shameless plug, there are 3 links in the show notes you can go check out if you'd like to donate to the cause. The problem is that the cancer treatment is with the Brzezinski Clinic, which is not covered by the FDA, and the reason is because it's effective and it doesn't use radiation therapy. It's a completely new way of looking at cancer as far as treating it with regards to diet, with regards to nutrients within the body, and his success rate is insane. And John has been showing an increased progress from going from being on a ventilator and suffering from pneumonia. He's still trying to kick the pneumonia, but they're saying that he could possibly come home by the end of the year now from stage 4 cancer at mid.
It's incredible.
And this is, I've been told it's based on, there are certain protocols that he brings in, and he, Dr. Brzezinski is kind of a genius when it comes to this type of thing. There are many ways to be able to treat cancer. People will smoke weed. They'll as you mentioned, they could fast. They can use the method that he's shown. One aspect that I've looked into, or at least heard, and this was from John Anthony West's daughter, which was a ketogenic diet, which I haven't.
Yeah, well, that will do the same thing. That will have the same kind of hormonal response. Fasting is better, but you have the way to have a hormonal profile that most approximates fasting is with a ketogenic diet. Now, that's why it will work, but fasting for 30 days will do it. And in fact, there are people who, and it's kind of ghost stories, but I've heard a couple of them, people who had cancer who, one woman, I was watching a video recently doing some research for a piece on fasting, and this woman was saying that she was very religious and she was overweight and had cancer and a lot of stomach cancer and so on. And she prayed, and she was told by God to fast for 30 days, 30 days and 30 nights that was fasting in the wild. So she did. And over this 30-day period, she obviously lost dozens of pounds. But she said, and this is the gross bit, that she was actually passing the cancers when she was on the toilet. And ever since then, 20 years later, and ever since then, she only eats on weekends, and she's healthy and fine and so on. And that's interesting because this ties in with the kind of, and this is why you need to update worldviews. It's kind of what we were talking about before. So you get the Nobel Peace Prize for discovering autophagy and how it works, and then all of a sudden you look back through history, and this is essentially the cure for these things that we've had the whole time. You go, wait a minute. So marijuana has been known since the Neolithic to have not just sort of shamanic journeying properties, but intimately involved in medicine, and everywhere would tell you to fast if you have different viral illnesses. And it's because it has a sort of a beneficial impact on the immune system. I think it's the same thing. I think this is how THC works, because it activates the endocannabinoid system, which regulates, amongst other things, the immune system. Mm-hmm. And so if a virus, if cancer is caused by a virus, and an oncovirus, sort of upregulating your immune system will fix it, while at the same time fasting will actually remove the damaged cells. So it's not even just like, ooh, I don't even know how this works. I kind of think maybe I do know how this works. And this is where you fall outside of Big Pharma's dysfunctional worldview, which is a materialist allopathic one, and there are options available to people, and these options, even if Bernie Sanders had won in the US and they had single payer healthcare, what we are talking about now would not be covered by it. So yay, you don't lose your house, and I mean that seriously. I just get very upset about the state of healthcare in the US. So I don't mean that as something glib, but what will the true understandings of health in the 21st century are not available, single payer or not, from Big Pharma.
Oh, goddamn no. That of course, because their entire business model is treating problems, hopefully to extend people's lives out enough so that when they eventually die from these problems, they're still collecting the issues. If they solve the problem, they reduce their user base. So what that
means... Yeah, well, what that means is that the game is the same as it has been since the Stone Age and before, which is that you are singularly and personally, and I don't mean responsible in a blame way, but you must assert sovereignty over your own health and the health of your family, regardless of the sort of governmental and financial condition. I actually think the argument for single payer can be made on an economic basis, which is the single biggest cause of bankruptcy in the US is a poor health diagnosis. So I'm actually surprised Republicans don't, because if you bankrupt a family, what if they're an employer, or people have to move out of their homes and so on. So there's actually a negative economic impact for how the US has their healthcare structured in the demonic way that they do. Well, but even if you solve that, it's like solving that, which I think will happen, is not the same thing as aligning with the more cutting edge understanding of health in the 21st century.
Now, from a shamanistic view, and like again, I'm kind of trying to tie things back here within the main subject, and we go all over on this show, like whichever direction the conversation takes us. But the main theme being magic. And again, shamans throughout history have been the magic workers. They've been the healers. They've been the soothsayers. They've been, in a positive sense, they've been the ones who have foretold when when to plant, when to harvest, when to when the proper time to attack is, because of environmental forces or what have you. A current version of that from our standpoint, from our society, would be like the Farmer's Almanac. And putting that into kind of like a grimoire, as it were, in a very basic sense, and I'm probably going to use it very colloquially with that. But the shamans have always been the ones who have been the holders of the information, the holders of the power, and respected within their communities because they're the ones that have made things happen. And I noticed that there is the shift, like there has been the shift between from let's say 1800s to 1900s, where we're Victorian ages, they're using leeches to bleed people, and there's all of these different ways to barbaric practices, as health professionals will put it. But at the same time, there's kind of a shift now, and I don't know if it's positive or negative, where the scientists that are and the health professionals, they're being rejected by a lot of the people, like just a lot of people from the alternative view, where they'll say like, oh, the scientist is saying X, Y, Z. Well, that scientist is full of shit because of X, Y, Z. Or they'll give a reason for it. But at the end of the day, the alternate view of things, and the alternate, like midwives are starting to make a comeback, for instance. Like the looking at the alternate ways of solving these problems has become a lot more prevalent in the last 20, 30 years, especially in the last 15, at least that I can see. But going to shamanism back 30,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, like what this knowledge hasn't necessarily changed. It's shifted its way of communication, but it hasn't necessarily changed. So, is there like where did it come from? Where did the source of this information originally come? Was it the fact that we've been around for 1.2 million years as a basic line of species, and it's just been accumulated knowledge, or has there been some type of information exchange that's been coming down from somewhere else?
With the caveat that shaman is a kind of very specific Eurasian term there. So
using a very general Western term.
Yeah. Just wanna just put that out because otherwise people yell at me.
Direct them to me if they do, please, because I can take that shit. I'm an internet troll. That's not a problem for me.
There you go. If you are the short answer, and I gave a presentation on this about this time last year in London called Campfire's Edge. The short answer is, if you ask cultures that continue to practice in an uninterrupted way more traditional engagements with non-human persons and plants and that kind of thing, they'll say the spirits told us. And in a very specific sense, and the most famous one amongst white people who listen to podcasts at the moment is probably the Ayahuasca Combination, and it's a very good example because if you look at the sort of species diversity in the Amazon, and you combine these two that don't even really do not grow together in a way, you get the most potent hallucinogen on the planet that also appears to be endogenous in that the brain appears to create it, and the lungs. So there is something to that. And there is also something to when you get rid of this positivist progressive notion, seeing as we're talking about Jaws himself, his Church of Progress idea. When you get rid of this model of history and you look at it correctly, this comes back to data analysis, you realize it's lumpy. Innovation is extremely across of human existence, extremely. And we're in one of the kind of vertical market phases now, which roughly correlates with, not necessarily the Industrial Revolution, but the widespread electrification of developed and developing economies. But it's just crazy. We're at this vertical point. There have been a few of them, and they are. It is impossible to explain them with a utilitarian materialist model. It's as simple as that. Now, when you go the whole way back to how is it that we know which combinations of plants or what happens, how did we work out that if when the stars are here, we should migrate to there and meet up with another tribe and do the usual things where you kind of marry off your daughters to their sons and vice versa, and all the kind of things you do 50,000 years ago. The answer, if you ask them, is, the spirits. The spirits told us. It is that ongoing interaction with us. And there are some interesting technological vectors, because technology is implicated in this in a way that is significant and mysterious on a macro basis. And it comes back to the snake in the garden, but it comes back to the idea, universally observed, but that the spirits or demons are responsible for giving mankind the tools of civilization. And the tools of civilization include not just metallurgy, but herbalism, and I suspect space travel in the last 100 or so years. So this is where you get to look at, particularly once you've become invincible. So once you've worked out, because if you're not there yet, and you are listening, you live in a magical universe. I don't know what they are, but spirits are real, etc., etc. So once you have that baked into your head, and the Church of Progress model falls away, and you realize that these things exist, and novelty and its velocity is unevenly distributed across the human timeline, you go, well, parsimony would suggest I put these things together and that they are implicated in some way. So humans and human consciousness is in some kind of ongoing interaction with the other side of Dr. Kreipel's one-way mirror. And when we get it right, the velocity of novelty, when I say right, when the signal is strong, the velocity of novelty appears to increase.
I'm trying to find a good response for that. Shit. That just blew my mind. Thank you, Gort. That happens once every couple episodes. With this type of societal change, or hearing from the spirits, and I'm going to pull from Laird Scranton with this, and the fact that the Dogon are probably the second best as far as the ayahuasca being the first, whereas the spirits told us. And by extension the Buddhists, where the information that they received with regards to if you're depending on which way you want to be able to lean, that they told them about Sirius, and they told them about all of these cosmological secrets that were passed down to the Egyptians, or the Dogon were the Egyptians, depending on which which line of thought you want to be able to get into. And that goes to the idea of extraterrestrial contact, whether we're dealing with a certain amount of, and I'm trying to say here, because whenever I talk about ancient aliens, and again, I'm going to go on a little bit of a rant here, so please do excuse me here, Gordon. I love the ancient alien guys, like Mike Barra, George Tsoukalos, amazing. Like they're good, hardworking people and entrepreneurs who have been very successful. The general idea of physical aliens coming down within the last 50,000 years, it's a possibility. There are cave paintings out there that depict beings which could be anything, but from our standpoint and a popular culture standpoint, very much resemble aliens. But the idea that everything is aliens, or therefore, because I do not know therefore aliens, is just bullshit to me. From the beginning of our civilization, I know you're thinking about the pimp theory, from the start of us as a species, it's a possibility, but have we really looked into the interdimensional? I'm not talking the interdimensional, child molesting aliens that Alex Jones talks about, but if we're looking at some type of contact, whether from beginning of our history to helping us out materially, and contact throughout our history on a spiritual sense, is in the fact that ayahuasca has been described as a gateway to contacting these beings, from whether you're talking about Terence McKenna or you're talking about from Cyclobin with the Clockwork Elves, or we're talking about just otherworldly beings that, let's say, Graham Hancock ran into in his ayahuasca journeys. It's a chicken and the egg thing. Where did we first get the knowledge from? And that's something that kind of always bugs me. And the pimp theory, or something along those lines, kind of seems to be a rational explanation. Other than that, it was just some guys got together and said, hey, let's just mix a bunch of shit together and see what gets us high. And they just stumbled across it. And, if the last 100 years is any indication, we've gone from mechanical computers that were built in massive warehouses just to be able to crack a cipher to the power to send somebody to the moon, or 4 times that in the palm of somebody's hand for instant communication. So, is this something that could have? Is it wrong to look at our society as a template to say, okay, well, if one generation just stumbled across something, that the next generation could have applied it?
I'm not sure what we would be a template for, and let me explain what I mean by that. Because it's only this sort of vertical market period is only about 120 years old, give or take. It's not clear to me that whoever has been involved in increasing our velocity of novelty has our best interests to heart. There is something mysterious about the development of the space program over the 20th century from kind of Crowley on, that suggests that there are kind of other hands playing on the keyboard at the same time as us. I think that's a reasonable statement for a show like this. As to why is not necessarily clear. So I don't know if we would be a template in the same way that less dysfunctional or more functional relationships with the spirit world resulted in different medicines and different life ways that I think are more stable and valuable that you might find in civilizations other than ours. So we are an example of it happening, maybe for good, maybe for bad, because for whatever reason, someone somewhere decided that they wanted us pig chimps on other planets fairly quickly. And if you look at the development of literally everything else, going from covered wagon to spacefaring in a lifetime, a long lifetime, but not that long, requires some explanation.
I know that there's one Dr. Ellis Silver who this is one of those...
I think that's cult. I know what you mean. I think that's a cult publication because there is no Dr. Ellis Silver.
That's one of the things I was trying to get to, because I'm like, okay, well, I'm trying to say, this book was out and people are talking about it, and Ancient Origins put out this article, and experts say this, experts say that, and there's this Dr. Ellis Silver. I'm like, okay, it's a 57-page book with a really shitty cover, and I cannot find any contact information for this person. So, is this person real? And it's the idea of, were we brought here, or are we, are we native of this planet? Is something that some people will discuss, and it's an interesting concept, even if the publication's bullshit. But from a anthropological standpoint, I'm of the personal persuasion that we as a species have been provided help, at least in terms of guidance, whether it is a matter of, well, here is this sentient species that came out of the middle of nowhere, or we can help improve it in small ways. and help guide them towards greatness. And hopefully at some point they can join us within the Galactic Federation or whatever the fuck is out there. But you'll have people like I'm trying to think his name here. Pretty much anybody. Whenever I hear Anunnaki and ancient aliens mentioned in the same word, in terms of mining gold, and I can respect anybody who will think of that because anybody who goes along the line of thinking because it brings attention at least to the idea and gets people thinking. But I think that line of thinking directly on that point is bullshit. Just based around the idea that Sitchin was a great writer, and it was very good. Like I think it's very good science fiction, but the man did not know. He didn't know cuneiform, and any cuneiform expert out there would completely disagree with anything that he had said. And he knew Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, but he didn't know cuneiform, and it's a completely different writing system. So, the idea of ancient alien, I'm going to say intervention. Like, what's your opinion on that?
Well, going back to, I have this kind of mission of re-enchanting the world. So there's a sequence of events that I think builds a least worst or most satisfactory model for the universe that allows these kind of discussions. And it's and the first one is to have some conception of a universe that includes a spirit world for all the reasons we previously discussed. Within that haunted universe, physical aliens probably exist, but you have to get there in that sequence. And if you don't, so the kind of ancient aliens program hypothesis such that it is now that we're in season 109, I think, is because it can only emerge out of a materialist worldview, and that's its dysfunction. So there's a lot of good data, like you can kind of pile up historical anomalies all you want. If at some point you have to kind of go, all right, well then I guess we got it wrong, and we should build something else. But the idea that physical aliens are involved as the gods is a denial of magic in history, because it's a materialist attempt to solve something that can't be solved because it's the worldview that's wrong rather than the evidence. And that's the kind of challenge when you come to ancient aliens, which is that it's a better and more parsimonious and kind of closer to an Occam's razor perspective is one of ongoing interactions with at least one non-physical realm, where the signal's either dialed up or dialed down, depending across the timeline as a baseline. That said, and this is a kind of Sagan perspective, and I write about this in Starships, my first book. There's been I am an interventionist in the sense that there is basically no way, funnily enough, so is Richard Dawkins, there's basically no way life could have spontaneously developed on Earth. I'm a directed panspermia person, but I mean it in a obviously more detailed way than I think materialist, because that's the least worst materialist assumption. And what's ridiculous to me about that is that directed panspermia requires someone to have directed the soggy rock. And no one seems to want to pull on that plug. So as for the sort of development of life on Earth, at its beginning, the best explanation is one that involves physical aliens or forms that will move things, depending on how you want to define alien, will actually move physical material through space. So at the very beginning point, I am an interventionist. I'm also probably at the moment, although I go in and out on this and the thesis doesn't really rely on it, I'm also an interventionist at some point. Like I do, so if we're talking about the PIMP hypothesis, which is Dr. Eugene McCarthy's realization that humans, it sounds funny until if you haven't heard it before, that humans are kind of half pig and half chimp. And where the pig bits we have, like laryngeal structure and lack of penis bone and the carbohydrate composition of our cells and kidney structure and organ microstructure are all pig. Like none of the other apes have it. And so that needs some kind of explanation. And so That one can be done when you were saying we need help, or we may have been nudged. That one doesn't require the spaceship to land and kind of having someone drape something over the lamp to get the mood lighting going for the pigs and the chimps. Like, there is a capacity to have a remote or resonant effect on things like DNA, given that it does respond to sound, and it actually does respond to waves and is structured in a way like that. That kind of shows that something can have hands in our development without having hands. And that is the piece that I don't think we've had sufficiently nuanced worldviews to look into, because the materialists won't touch it, and the ancient aliens people are still also too materialist. And typically, if you talk to esotericists, at least over the last 100 years, you'll just get, fruity theosophical nonsense about it. And we need to come back to having discussions around data, which is, these are the data points. Let's all have a go at interpreting or analyzing it. And in that respect, I'm a physical interventionist at the kind of beginning of life on Earth. But as for the involvement of physical aliens in being largely responsible for the development of human culture, I don't think there have been enough encounters for that to have happened, and I think we need to kind of jump back down to that magical universe model instead.
Well, this is one of the reasons why, and again, I'm jumping off of a point that Lee Veltman, like Lee in YouTube chat, I'm trying not to say his full name here, but he mentions Dr. Dr. Greer, who is one of the driving forces behind the disclosure movement, and from I have to say it publicly, from a disclosure standpoint, and from a bringing attention to the fact that there is so much deep technology that's been hidden from public view by governments around the world, and the fact that we have contact with extraterrestrials, whether currently now or have been in the past, He's been the forefront of that, and I can respect him 110% for that, and I'll always go to bat for that. He's brought in the more mystical, in some of his lectures, the more mystical, well, the aliens are, they've accompanied me into, into the Pentagon, and they're not material, but they're there and I can see them type of thing, and I've heard various recounts from some of his, what's the term? Some of his retreats that could seem a little bit dubious, as it were. And again, Lee's now giving me the emoticon smiley face with sunglasses. Thank you. And it's along that same lines, where and if the idea of the interventionist, where you'll have people who have said, okay, well, we've had alien contact within our civilization hardcore since World War II, and the Nazis had alien technology, and they now have bases in Antarctica, and that's what the high jump was all about, and they're going to go on this whole, fucking massive tirade about how for the last almost 100 years of human development has been based around, based around alien technology, where it could have just been, well, shit, there's a crashed ship, and they reverse engineer it, and, we got most of our technology from that, and the fact that a lot of it could have been back engineered by third-party companies and private enterprises. But the interventionist side of things, where, or even going on the David Icke line of thinking, which we lampoon David Icke on this show quite a lot, actually, believe it or not. Just because the idea that reptilian aliens are controlling the Shriners, the Freemasons, the Oddfellows, the Mystic Order of the Elk, and every single other fraternal organization out there, but they're all led by some reptilian overlord, shape-shifting, god being that are here to suck our souls out. It just seems full of shit from me. It just completely seems full of shit to me. Is there a middle ground that a lot of people can at least start from that can cut through a lot of the bullshit?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Well, Do you mean, is there anything between being a smug and insufferable Guardian reader and being David Icke? Probably. I sure hope so. If you mean, is there a middle ground when dealing with the story of UFOs? I think I'm as I said, it comes to data and hypotheses, and I'm familiar with the kind of canon of 20th century ufology, which is that the Nazis found something, and some of that stuff was taken to what is now the New Mexico area, and as part of the radar tests, they managed to crash a flying saucer, and from that flying saucer came a whole bunch of different technology and so on. The thing is, as you mentioned, all you need is a crashed ship. You don't even need a flying saucer. You actually just need the idea of it. Like, how would it get here? And then you start thinking about electrogravitics. So the saucer can crash in your mind. And in that sense, when you realize that you don't even need a flying saucer to crash for Lockheed Martin to start building flying saucers, is getting it kind of back to that campfire's edge way of doing it. And I think that's the middle ground. I think you have to hold two ideas in your head simultaneously, which is provably powerful governments, powerful Western governments. Kings used to do it, right? But like in the 20th century, the second half of it is essentially a lie. It's essentially like a government policy lie. Have that idea in your head, and then at the same time kind of have a more nuanced view of how ufology works. I'm not a huge Greer fan. I think he's very credulous. I also think he's very irresponsible with his beliefs to do with aliens and them, more or less being our space brothers. And from a magical perspective, he does things that I think are not recommended, like playing the Colin Andrews crop circle recordings while out in the desert to try and summon little lights. Now, that's one, you're just going to attract terrible demons doing that. But two, the stuff you see in conditions like that, you can't say you didn't hallucinate. So I find him not very good. I think he's a very good example of, I guess, the canon of ufology in 20th and early 21st century. But I don't think there's much anything that relies on that kind of we have these whistleblowers is provably ripe for misinformation, and so you just kind of have to keep a lot of that at arm's length if you want to navigate it in a way. And it comes back to the underlying worldview is dysfunctional if you haven't managed to incorporate side effects and so on in prior to having those discussions, because then you start saying things like, well, aliens are beaming these thoughts into my mind and that's how I know they're there. And you think, well, I wonder if there isn't a better way of thinking about this.
Okay. And a perfect example of this, I'm not going to say, I know, what's his name? Oh, geez. Sorry, I'm trying to be able to decide whether I actually want to say his name or not, because he's been on many, many podcasts before. Radio. I'm trying to be able to find the exact name here. Okay, well, Jack, like for instance, Gerald Clark. Again, don't know the man personally, but in terms of his interpretation and in terms of the way that he says his experiences are with regards to ancient history, just seems a little bit too fantastical to me. There's that idea of, the idea of what is it, like, is it real or is it not? But there's like with 3D animation, have you heard of the Wu Valley before?
No.
Okay, well, in 3D animation, when it comes to animating...
Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, Uncanny Valley. Well, I've always heard it as the Wu Valley, but Uncanny Valley is the same idea. It's the exact same thing, where it looks cool enough, but there's a certain point within 3D animation of actual humans where you start to look at it and you're recognizing and saying this is not real, but you can't actually 100% say for sure. And there's the part of your brain that says, okay, well, something's weird about what's going on here. And I feel like a lot of ufology and a lot of ancient history with regards to aliens and a lot of alien discussion that has happened, especially within the last 3 years. And this is one of the reasons why we started this goddamn show, was to try and cut through this bullshit. It enters that uncanny valley. And it's like kind of like the the initial downward slope where people can't tell the difference. And because they've been exposed to so much information out there, and whether it's from governments, whether it's from just people trying to make a buck off of it in the moment, like they buy into it until there's this certain amount of time goes past where they exit that valley. And it could be within a week, it could be within a couple of hours, fuck it, it could be a couple of years. But there's a lot of misinformation, whether it's from governments, whether it is from individuals themselves who are just trying to make a buck. And I can understand from some people it's entrepreneurship, and they will present it in a way that is, here's the information, we're going to give you our view, make up your minds for yourselves. But there's a lot of gullible people out there, unfortunately. And that's kind of just what it just makes me sad to a certain extent, because there's so much core information that they are foregoing or neglecting or just skimming past, which is relevant to our society or our species as a whole in terms of our development or in terms of our current state of being, that they're going to look past because of of this spooky valley, as it were.
Well, do you think we've ever really had an informed populace anywhere? I'm kind of a bit sanguine about it. I don't really care that much about people, but two, I kind of struggle to, like, I appreciate it, but the disclosure movement is wrong in the sense that its fundamental assumption that the government is certainly lying. It does that when its lips are moving.
Of course. That's without saying.
But as for like the promise of the disclosure movement is that somehow government officials have the answer, and I'm kind of in a more Nick Redfern camp about this, which is I don't think they do. I think the answers are private, so they're kind of running off this Cold War propaganda of which was invented by the West, and particularly the US, to freak out the Soviets. Like the idea that those capitalist pigs have got their hooves on a flying saucer wouldn't have gone down well in Moscow at the time, because that's what literally most of it comes from that. And it's also air cover for experimental technology and so on during the course of the Cold War. And all this has been turned into some kind of quasi-religion where the government is hiding all these things for people and demanding disclosure. They don't know. It's not there anymore. Like, if it was ever there, it's been privatized and the documents are gone. One of Nick Redfern's best books for me is For Nobody's Eyes Only, where he actually looks at the fact that even people with top secret clearance, when they go looking for records of things, they're gone. And it's very difficult to gone things from military archives. So I don't know if people have ever really been informed. The other thing that I think people miss is that you can, it's challenging to systematize or neatly categorize these experiences that go into building up a worldview towards something like disclosure. And a good example for me comes from kind of history of European magic, where if you look at the history of grimoires, they warp so much through particularly the sort of 13th to 17th century because they are essentially only half built. They're things that an individual magician or a close working group of them would use to gain contact to certain spirits. And once that contact has been achieved between the two groups, if you will, so spirits and magicians, individualized practices and modes of contact will emerge. And a very good modern example of that is the Skoll Experiments, which is my favorite ever Society for Psychical Research subject, which is a group of people who sat for 20 years doing seances in the east of England and got, the usual kind of incredible effects out of it. And there's something, the variance of experiences that we currently categorize as UFOs, particularly when it comes to things like abductions, makes it difficult to systematize and build a credible worldview on top of. And in that sense, like the lack of an informed populace, like, what are we going to inform them of? We don't actually know what's going on, you know? Does that make sense?
Well, like that's it. And, I know I forget who the individual was, but, even for myself, like, I've had jobs which required a certain amount of clearance, and I'm not going to discuss which clearance that was or how much information I had access to. But even for myself, if I left that position...
Ultraviolet reptilian clearance. You actually are a David Icke fellow, I know it.
Well, if I were a David Icke fellow, the person that I would be, again, I'm 32nd degree Freemason, so we're just below the point where I'm actually a reptilian, like, child molesting alien from, Zeta Reticuli, but I'm
there's something to aim for.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, there's something to aim for, but even within the jobs that I've had, I still don't disclose that, because I understand that there is a certain amount, like, even within Freemasonry, they say, okay, well, we're going to give you some secrets, and the secrets are basically the passwords, the passcripts, the hand grips or tokens, and the penalties. Other than that, everything else in Freemasonry is essentially open. But we're giving those secrets because it's like, are you a willfully perjured individual? Are you somebody who's going to be able to keep that secret, and do you have a conscience to be able to keep that secret, or you're full of shit and you're just going to give it out to anybody? So a lot of these people who are within that realm, if they have that information, unless they honestly believe and there is some type of conscious reason to try and disclose it, and they have something beyond their own word, like, let's say, documents, and they're willing to be able to disclose it firsthand, and they're verifiable, or, of that sort, they're, like, anything is suspect. People, they're going to want to, people want to talk. People are going to try and talk themselves up. Everyone tries to exaggerate. Or as Dr. House says, everyone fucking lies. So the idea of disclosure, it's like, well, there's a lot of interesting information out there, and I've seen crazy shit in the sky. I've seen glowing orbs to full-on UFOs in broad daylight. Beyond that, I've I don't know. Was it alien? Was it man-made? Is there information out there? Probably, but whomever's disclosing it, is it real or not? That's kind of one of the main things. And the people who are saying, like, I'm 100% true and this is 100% right, usually the people who say that they are more right or more truthful are the ones who are lying the most, in my experience. I could be wrong.
Yeah, or they're, deluded. So what happens, there appears to be trends in ufology as well, and the kind of widespread misinterpretation, if you think of like the 60s and 70s and Adamski and star cults and so on, was a misinterpretation of what I'm sure were real experiences, whatever they happen to be. And I suspect we're heading back into that world now in a funny way. I think we're heading into a star cult world as people realize that the kind of the Disclosure Project's worldview is not correct. Like that kind of 20th century big story of ufology is wrong. I think we're seeing a kind of shift back towards, or the swing of the pendulum back towards misinterpreting it in an overly mystical fashion again, which is interesting, just observationally. I don't think it is a phenomenon that likes the idea of being solved, and I don't think it ever has, and kind of history is littered with the broken worldviews that have come from, well, the ones that have just gone out of date, but clearly show attempts of a culture to grapple with phenomena like these, and I think that's just the reality of it, and it dances at the edge of speculation in a way that leads us in a direction it wants us to go. And this is kind of what I mean about the last 120 years. You don't need a flying saucer. You just need the idea of it to start to do some of the things we've done. And that's interesting. So it sits there in the imaginal at the edge of what is possible. and how that would have manifested in Sumer or ancient Egypt wouldn't be how it manifested in the 20th century, because they wouldn't have been able to conceive of it in a way that would allow them to be manipulated or complexified. And I think in that sense I'm a bit Valean. Like, I think the primary goal of these phenomena, or its primary target, is culture rather than technology, and technology falls out of that cultural impact.
And I'm just going to give you because I'm looking at my YouTube clock, which is always wrong because I usually refresh. I know we've got about 20 minutes left or so on this conversation, so I just wanted to be able to give you that fair warning before we get into something very deep.
Sounds good.
Cool. Let's move into something that is very interesting to me and what we built this show off of. Let's talk about ancient history and cultures.
Nice one.
Oh, I thought so. I know that your talk with Grimerica, and I've listened to that episode, and Darren's gonna bug me to no end and make fun of me for the next week because of it. That is probably the most listened to episode of Grimerica I've ever listened to, besides the Randall Carlson episode. And they had like the first one, just based around the fact that you guys went all over the place, and a lot of it came down to confirming the information that Graham Hancock has discussed with regards to Sunderland and the civilization's development past the Younger Dryas, past the Younger Dryas extinction event. From your standpoint, how do you see world development from past comet impact to back into the Younger Dryas to the Big Melt, as it were?
I don't think there was a comet impact. I don't think he's right about that.
Okay, well, let's start from there.
Yeah, the comet, this magical comet that comes and goes. I don't think I think Magicians wasn't Graham's best book. I think it was a bit messy, and this kind of come and going comet that conveniently only hit ice sheets, and that's why we don't have any pieces of it. There are any number of ways you can crack Earth underneath very heavy ice sheets for obvious reasons. And in my own book, because I've been doing, it's funny to hear words that were being used in 1999 in my presentations and research, like Younger Dryas and Sunderland now. I don't think the comet thing happened. I think it was, I kind of go towards a Dr. Paul Laviolette angle to do with solar plasma ejecta, because there is no comet. And the actual diamond layer is not evenly distributed, or you can't localize an impact from it. Regardless, there was some sort of fairly intense meteorological things that happened around this time, quite clearly, but I don't think it falls neatly into this half-broken comet that keeps coming back, and that's what civilizations are trying to warn us of. They don't care. They don't care about us.
Well, okay. That's and I can understand that. In episode 22, we actually had Randall Carlson and Robert Schock on the same show, and I'd heard from Clay Roop that John Anthony West had always wanted to hear a debate, or at least a discussion. I didn't understand from a academic standpoint what an academic debate could be like, or adversarial a debate could be like. So Schock was very, I'm going to say, he didn't want to fucking be a part of it, because it's like, shit, this is going to turn into a shit show. And when I hear debate, I hear lively discussion like we're having right now, like a change, a sharing of ideas, as it were. Schock is strictly coronal mass ejection. Randall Carlson, he's comet impact / or at least a bolide impact. And there's the latest Joe Rogan experience that they were on. I don't know the don't know the exact number. I think it was like it was like the top 913s. It was number episode 961, and one of the researchers that came on actually disproved the comet impact. He said it was some type of extraterrestrial experience, whether it was he was thinking more meteorite, or like a dirty blob of matter that just came in. But still, like The jury's still out there. It's not 100% confirmed. But something did happen, whether it was coronal mass ejection, whether it was some impact from some object from outer space. But the fact is, something did happen to the planet that brought it back into that Younger Dryas, or into that deep freeze, which we call the Younger Dryas. The experience of humanity afterwards, in terms of religion, in terms of belief, has always been characterized around the corpulent goddess. Are you aware? Are you familiar with that that term?
I know what corpulent means, but I don't know if I've heard that term. No.
Okay, corpulent. I'm just googling right now. It's a figurine goddess and goddesses of old Europe. 7,000.
Oh, so yeah. Oh, all right, so like a Venus of Willendorf kind of idea.
Yes. Now I know that, and I know that within the last. And this is going to go a little bit off topic, but the most recent episode of Magical Egypt 2, you can check it out at magicalegypt.com. Scotch for your 10% off is above. Have to plug it. It's kind of my thing. You got to support. The idea that that figurine is not only a figurine of, I'm going to say, a celestial deity of some kind, but it's also a representation of a part of the brain, apparently. That's kind of what is being discussed. If you take the standard mode of development within society, you are thinking that, okay, well, they've got this figurine, it came from somewhere, they just worshipped it, and that was it. Obviously, Magical Egypt 2 has not finished airing at this point, but the idea that it's a cross-section of the brain, or the brainstem from a certain angle, is quite interesting. Now, from a development standpoint, do you think this type of medical knowledge, or this type of knowledge of anatomy, or of the human being could have been started at that point?
So let me just stack those ifs. So
it's a lot of ifs, I know. I'm sorry.
If there was a comet, and then afterwards, if there was a change to religion, and if the Venus of Willendorf represents this religious change, its passing resemblance to the brain, or from a certain cross section, could mean something medically. Well, have you read Starships by any chance?
Unfortunately, I have not.
Okay, well, good, because this is going to sound new to you then. When you find out-of-place technological complexity in history, and you mentioned Laird Scranton, and I'll come back around to that, because I think that's a good example of it. I don't think he realizes what he's got.
Oh, shit. Well, I talk to Laird's on a fairly regular basis, so I'll pass it on.
I like his stuff. And I spoke to Greg about, but before he went on Higher Chats, Greg said, should I ask him about this stuff? And this is what I'm going to say now. And he's very open to this idea, which I like. We have, so stack all those ifs, and this is, I guess, one of the main problems with some of the kind of high technology assumptions about Old Kingdom Egypt in particular. They say, this looks like the brainstem. They must have known about, neurosurgery. Well, it doesn't mean that at all. Same thing with the surprising kind of chromosomal iconography associated with the Nomo and the Domons. Like, you can look at them. This is Laird stuff, right? You can look at them and go, yeah, that's a very good interpretation. This looks like cells. And they didn't have microscopes, so why does it look like cells? If something looks like the brainstem or cells, or if you have something that appears to look like DNA and so on, to me, I interpret that as evidence that whatever we've entangled our consciousness with, that's evidence of good contact, because we're getting this stuff. So our ancestors 30,000 years ago are being shown these things that they have no understanding of, but to say, well, so the machine elves, or whatever you want to call them, showed me this, and I'm going to draw it, or I'm going to carve it. And for me, that is very good evidence for that consciousness entanglement model, which is what Starships is about, rather than kind of over-interpreting it. And I think a lot of that kind of world, the idea that they set these things up as warnings for us and so on, is modern interpretations that don't I don't think are very credible, because we can't even stop, over the course of history, fucking or eating our own children, or like, the neighbor's children or so on. The idea that we care about Americans 12,000 years after Göbekli Tepe, and we need to let them know about what's possibly a comet, I don't think is a very good interpretation of what is definitely there, which is really, really curious iconography that has some resemblance to what modern medicine is showing us. You would expect, in an hypothesis where magic ritual, or whatever you want to call it, allows us to communicate with non-physical or extra-dimensional beings, you would expect that process to be to artifact the way it does by having these weird different things that shouldn't be there, and instead of inventing the idea that the Great Pyramid is an electrical weapon, you go, well, or here's a thought: they were that good at ritual that they're actually kind of we can use the bizarre implications of technology as proof that they're actually being shown things by real extra-dimensional entities. And I think that's the kind of broad thesis that underpins starships. And I think, frankly, it's better than trying to say, well, look at how advanced their medical knowledge was. You don't know that, but they're talking to something that showed a brainstem. And if you've ever taken hallucinogenic drugs, that stuff happens.
Well, I have not, so that's...
there you go.
I have.
Oh my
Nice.
God, he's alive! Jesus Christ!
Sorry, just quietly listening in on this conversation.
That's much appreciated. So, from the development of... And I'm seeing a lot of information being passed back and forth in the chat, information by saying... Everyone's like, there was a catastrophe. We don't care what it was. We just want to know that it actually happened. What happened from there? Okay, so we've just established that the whole brainstem theory doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. From a development standpoint, why is there such a large pushback from the current community? And I've heard anything from ego. I've heard anything from, just lack of evidence with regards to mainstream archaeology, or even semi-mainstream archaeology, from saying that, we're only about 7,000 years old, that's it. Like, in your experience, what's caused it?
I don't know if that's true anymore. I think alternate history invents a argument. It was certainly true. It was certainly true, 1950s to 1970s, but during the course of writing Starships, I spoke to these Assyriologists and so on, and they're fine with it. The trouble is, if you have an academic career, it's not like they're defending this 3500 BC date that we kind of get that kind of mid-20th century model of history from. It's just that you have on one side of people going, you guys, mainstream academics are wrong. It started before 3500 BC, and the mainstream academics will look at it and go, well, yeah, I don't know where you've been the last 40 years, but in the meantime, you're talking about land speeders in Egypt and all this stuff, and that's not correct. So I think a lot of that debate is in fact invented. My concern with academia is that it moves, I call it academic generations. Again, it's in Starships, but a bad idea can persist for about 100 years by virtue of how academia is structured and how you have to kind of agree with the person who is more or less responsible for your climb within a department and so on. So there are a bunch of dumb ideas that are in the way of going out. But the dysfunction that presents itself within public versions of history is again the materialist one, rather than no one would dare defend the kind of Eurocentric progressive technology view of history in any history department or amongst any historians that I actually know personally. So I don't know if that's actually where the challenge is. I actually think it's almost a plague on both their houses' observation that the land speeder stuff is idiotic, and so is this kind of materialist utilitarian explanation that you will get in the quote unquote mainstream. Like everyone's arguing about the wrong thing in this case.
Well, hell, even I've gotten David Roll to consider or at least admit to the possibility of Atlantis, or at least as far as the way that it's been described by Plato. So there is some movement by mainstream. The major idea is, for me, that what is... there are so many points of evidence that are out there. Like, even recently, within the last 2 months, there was a team in San Diego that found a human settlement, potentially, quote-unquote. I'll use quote-unquote just to kind of protect myself from those who say I'm saying it is or not. That, there was human there was human activity here in North America 130,000 years ago, which would completely throw out the entry into North America via the Bering Strait Bridge hypothesis, because, well, if they were supposed to be here 20,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, then why are these people here 150,000 years ago or 130,000 years ago? And that brings into mind that, okay, you've got the Solutrean hypothesis, which would bring Western Europeans here to Eastern North America via boat during the Ice Age. And if you listen to Randall Carlson, his idea is that at least the Mid-Atlantic was full of archipelagos and was fairly moderate at this point for weather. Or, the Polynesian style of travel, which was island hopping. I know that there are DNA strands on the western coast of South America which relate back to Asia, but we're talking many, 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 many thousands of years before anybody from that part of the world was supposed to have actually been there.
Sure. I don't know if it throws out this is a very good example of what I mean by alternate history is just as bad as mainstream history. It doesn't throw out the Bering Strait hypothesis. What it does is shows that other things were going on beforehand. And I think in a lot of cases, particularly with the Americas, because there is some very good stuff in Central and South America that is at the 150 to 200,000 year old mark. Now, firstly, what we found is settlements. So we don't know if they were Homo sapiens sapiens. And with each passing year, it looks like our hominin cousins were basically about as smart as us. So it could have been them. It also could have been, and I asked this because when I was doing the book, when I was doing Starships, I went to Oxford to talk to the kind of Out of Africa project. And I said, here's the thing. Explain what would happen if there was an earlier colonizing group out of Africa and they died without passing on their genetic material. Are they going to show up? And obviously the answer is no. It's also yes-ish, because then you kind of have to hope that there's genetic material at one of their sites. Otherwise, you're in a needle in the haystack looking for where they plug back into this journey before leaving Africa. So I think a lot of that went on with the Americas. But so it doesn't throw out that there was a genetic migration. You can track it linguistically. People arrived around 15,000 BC from kind of like northern Eurasia into the Americas. That happened. They didn't arrive into a continent that didn't have humans on it. But there was that migratory wave. And this is the piece, both sides, and particularly alternate history, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so everything has to be this one Atlantis. There was a comet and everything comes from Atlantis kind of idea, simply because, and this is the correct observation piece of it, there are things that have happened that are outside of the accepted model history at the moment. But to you kind of weave it into this narrative. My favorite and most frustrating one is trying to bend over backwards using meteorological effects to demonstrate how Exodus might have happened. Like, this is not. This is going back to data and interpretations. If you fuse them together, they're not very useful. And I think this is one of the challenges that presents itself. It also may be the function of alternate history. Atlantology as an idea has been around for a very, very long time. I mean, this is what happens when European empires discover, or more to the point, invade Egypt centuries before they know how to read hieroglyphs. So you get this kind of what I call in the book Egyptosophy, this idea of Egypt as just wild speculation, in, Napoleonic France and so on, wild speculation, because they can't read hieroglyphs. That took much, much longer. And this is kind of just how we tell stories to ourselves. It doesn't mean the stories are right or wrong. It just means we tell stories, and this is how they move through time. And there's a kind of militarized alternate history view, which is this completely upends things, and that's not really that's not useful if we want to get to a more coherent and wider view of what's gone on with humans and the story of the planet.
That makes a lot of sense. I think we're coming to about the end here, because I know that we're about the 2 hour and 30 minute mark since we started.
So if you've been waiting around for the sandwich stuff, what's coming up?
Well, no, also it's a matter of the Senators are also currently in overtime in Game 7, and it's a matter of, I know my wife is probably saying, like, where the hell's Chris? And it's I know it's mid-after. The beautiful part is for the time difference, it's mid-afternoon for you there. It's about like 2:30 in the afternoon right now, 4 o'clock.
1 p.m.
Oh, well, that's even better. Are there any closing statements or arguments you'd like to be able to make?
What am I being accused of? Yeah.
Being an absolutely awesome gentleman and a wonderful guest, and one of the best people we've had on here to talk about wild, mind-blowing things.
Well, if that's the case, then the defense or the prosecution, whichever one I am, rests. And thank you very much. It's been a really fun conversation.
And as I expected for our conversation, it was going to go all over the place. Yeah, that's pretty much, like, Nico, do you have anything to add? You got
just that it's been fun and a privilege. And
well, thank you very much.
I apologize for being more of a wallflower than contributing anything meaningful to the conversation. But
well, I have to say it, like, again, Big Sexy Alex probably would have contributed a lot more, but Big Sexy Nico, he's got that giant beard on him, and he's not my regular co-host, but like, Alex, grow some facial hair, because, man, you got some competition, bro. I'm just saying. So I'm going to play some outro music for you. We usually get our guests pick by song name. So I'm going to go with your choices are Sacred Knowledge, Spellbound, Waking Up, or He Who Destroys All.
Ooh, last one.
He Who Destroys All. I haven't actually played this one, I don't think. Oh, this is like some crazy violin shit going on here. So, for ladies and gentlemen who are still on the show, we're going to have Denver Michaels on here in just a second to give us a sandwich contest update. Denver, if you're listening, he's logged into Skype right now. Fantastic. Gordon, this conversation's been about as amazing as I can actually expect. We'd love to have you on the show at some point in the future. You're always welcome in the den, and I will plug Rune Soup whenever I can.
Nice one. Thanks again.
It's my pleasure. Have yourself a wonderful weekend.
Will do.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the great Gordon White. And this is some pretty epic fucking music. What do you think, Nico?
I think it sounds like the intro to a space battle simulator.
All right, let's get Denver in here. Gonna call him.
You know what I mean, though?
Yeah, it's like Free Space 2.
Yeah, there are armadas clashing to this track.
Exactly. 1 second here.
Hello?
Hello, Denver, give me a second here. Just trying to, Oh, wait, let me move this a little bit to the, center. There we go. Denver, how you doing?
I'm good, man. How's it going?
You have a picture behind you today.
Yeah, do you see who it is?
No, I can't because there's a giant spotlight in front of it.
Stupid glare.
Oh, it's Kramer. Oh my God in
Cosmo
heaven.
Kramer.
Cosmo motherfucking Kramer. So I'm going to just get your get the sandwich music on here. 1 second. No, happy. There we go.
There's
Every fucking time. Every fucking time. So
I could eat sandwiches to this.
So Denver, we have had. Welcome to the Denver Michaels Sandwich Contest update, brought to you by the letter Z, the number 2, and
Color orange.
The color orange. Thank you, appreciate that. So Denver, I know we've had a lot of updates, like a lot of entries in the last week. How's it been going?
Yeah, I managed to knock out a few of them this week. I posted one on, I did a Twitter update on the one, posted a little video, I think on Sunday. Yeah, we had, and actually, you know what, this week we've got a little movement on the leaderboard, so exciting things are happening.
Kevin, your position may have been usurped. Just you've held the number 1 spot for like the last 2 months. I'm just saying, bruh. Just like get ready. Go for it.
Yeah, so we had a turkey pesto salt and pepper sandwich. I think Mark Catalano sent that in. I scored that at a 9, which knocks off Jared and Kevin that were in the 2 spot. So we've got a new number 2 now. So
that's Kevin from the UK, and Jared, who has been traveling all around South America, to all of the megalithic sites, and who is now, I think, in Christchurch, in New Zealand. Like, he's been listening to the show right now. He was, at least earlier on, but he's knocked at number 2.
Yeah,
that's
they
unfortunate.
got knocked out.
Now, can we like add some like a 3rd place spot, like a fight to the death, like kind of like a Mortal Kombat style?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. So, who's the first like the first 2 spots as well as the last spot, which is the shittiest sandwich you've received so far?
Well, so we had, I had one more sandwich. The worst sandwich so far is Ellen at a score of 2. That was a warm tuna on toast with peas.
Oh my God, Ellen.
It's just so bad. I mean, one bite, I'm just like, blah. But she got a little run for her money this week from Robert Newell Jr. He had a peanut butter, bologna, lettuce, tomato, and mayo. I scored that at a 2.5. It was probably as bad as Ellen's sandwich, but she's helped to use her stomach for longer, so.
Okay, Denver, that entire last bit just like got completely garbled out.
Oh no. Is that on my end?
It may be. I don't know. I'm also streaming the hockey game on my cell phone. But it's on a completely separate internet than the stream we're on, so we should be fine.
Can you hear me now okay?
Goddamn Verizon salesman. Yeah, we can hear you fine. You're good.
Okay. Well, anyway, I was just saying that Ellen got a run for her money. Robert Newell Jr. sent in a peanut butter, bologna, lettuce, and tomato, and mayo sandwich. And it was pretty bad, but I'm keeping Ellen at the bottom.
Ellen, if you're still listening, you are still the worst of the worst. And also, but number one on my heart for this show. Yeah. Thank you very much.
She's been a good sport.
She has been.
We've been killing her every week. But yeah, she's been a good sport. And let's see, what else did I try? Joe Mallard just sent in the classic BLT, one toasted, one not toasted. So I averaged the scores. I gave it a 5.75. Yeah, BLT is just okay. I don't love... I don't like tomatoes on my sandwich, so it kind of kills it for a BLT. So that's this week's update.
Jim, we appreciate your contribution, but you're fucked.
Well, he'll be all right, I guess.
Well, he's not winning shit, but he's also like the host of a show that gets like 20, 30,000 more people a week than we do.
Yeah,
so
I think he's doing just fine.
He's doing just fine. So, I know I've been sending you, like, people left, right, and center the last week. I know we've gotten one recently, which was on our 50 Fades Darker episode, which was episode 37.
Yeah.
That, I know you're putting the queue, so...
Yeah, I've probably got about 7 or so in the queue. I've got a 3-day weekend coming up here. I work tomorrow, but I'm off Monday, so hopefully I can get a bunch tested out here this weekend.
Now, I know Kevin from the UK is going to kill me because I know he sent in one recently over Twitter today. Because I told him he's got until midnight our time. I checked the rules because I've been busy recently. And apparently I was wrong. It's actually till the midnight on the 31st. So he has until midnight on the 31st Eastern Standard Time to get his recipe in. But he sent it to you, so he's good. So
yeah, I've got it.
Okay, fantastic. So if you're going to send in a sandwich recipe, today's the 25th. You have like 6 days, 6 full days to send it to info@denoflore.com or tweet it at me at denoflore. Or put it in the comments of YouTube, and Denver will get those recipes done in great order. And now, I have to say one thing: any recipe you send is a final recipe. Like, you could send multiple recipes for multiple entries, but if I get a recipe that is like, okay, Denver's like, okay, like, man, this recipe would be great without X. Well, fuck it, he sent in with X. You got to make that sandwich. It's the score. That's fair.
Can I give people a hint?
No fucking peanut butter.
Yeah, I mean, peanut butter's okay, but listen, guys, peanut butter does not go with everything. Maybe you think it does, but I don't. I'm judging the sandwiches. Peanut butter and pickles, peanut butter with mayo, or peanut butter with the BLT, it sucks. I don't want it. Don't send in peanut butter with everything, and big slices of tomatoes. No.
Okay.
There's the hint.
No peanut butter, no tomatoes. If you want that is a pro tip hint to win from Denver at like the 11th hour for this contest.
Or at least how to not lose.
Well, the thing is, like, okay, here's the thing. I get a I'll get a sandwich recipe and I'll send it to Denver. You're like, motherfucking peanut butter again? God damn it! And I have to deal with this. I have to deal with this shit. Denver's a nice guy.
But hear me out. What about with cheese?
One that would have won the other day.
Well, like, it doesn't matter. Like, the thing is, like, Denver's the most even keel guy. My mom, who listens to this show and says, "Chris, stop swearing," says, "Have more of that Denver Michaels guy on this show." And he's telling me this fucking sucks. Like, that's like, just like guys, like, peanut butter, tomato, leave it out. You got like 6 days. Do it. Just do it up.
You sent me one the other day. If it didn't have the peanut butter, I guarantee it would have won. It would have knocked Kevin out of his number one spot.
I know. And I flat out said he sent it in as this. I can't like, I can make rules up on the spot as per the post. Like, hey guys, you have to be sending it in via photo with a hat. Your shoe is a hat. And if it's not with a shoe, you're like, without a shoe on your head, it is disqualified. Like, I can make that rule, but I'm not going to.
We got to be fair.
We have to be fair. Because we are fair and benevolent.
If we're not fair, we're not anything.
Exactly. But, Denver, you've been a fantastic sport. I think this is the most insane contest ever run on any podcast ever.
It's so stupid, it's cool.
I know. we are 5 months into this contest. We were originally gonna launch it, and like I'm telling Nico, I brought Denver back in for we have our cryptozoology updates every now and again from Denver, because he's a cryptozoologist. Like Bigfoot, water monsters, you name it, he's got 3 books published on the subject. Amazing narratives about his experiences. And we said, okay, he's out in the field a lot, so we gotta get him well fed while he's out there. And especially since his new book was out in West Virginia, so he's like, a couple hours drive from his home. So we want to make sure he's well fed while out in the field. Now, how do you get well fed? Sandwiches. So send in your fucking sandwich recipes to info@denoflore.com, and you can win 3 books free from Denver Michaels, signed from the man himself, the myth, the legend, the
peanut butter and tomato hater.
There you go. That's a good Twitter handle.
There we go. And he's been an absolute sport about the entire thing. He's been providing updates on Twitter, on Facebook, on, like, you name it. And this is probably, no matter how many episodes we do, no matter how many contests we do, this is going to be like the benchmark for anything we do going forward, because it's just that awesome. Because Denver's that fucking awesome. So go check out Denver's books at Amazon.com. Just put in Denver Michaels, or go to denvermichaels.net. Just support the man, because he's out there fighting for the truth, just like us, but in a cryptozoologist, Bigfoot might be real type of way. So that's the sandwich update, I think.
Yeah, that's all I got.
So Denver, I know that you do, once this contest is done, we're going to have you back on for your cryptozoology updates.
Okay.
I hope.
Sounds good.
You can't see me? Can you see me?
Yeah. Having internet trouble again.
And Kevin just said books, ! Yes, Kevin, books. So,
Kevin's going to have to step up his game if he wants those books.
Goddamn right. Now, next week on the show, and Denver, I want you on the episode for this. We have some amazing guests on next month. And it is our throwback month. We just finished Culture Month in the Den of Lore. Culture Month was, like, absolutely mind-blowing with, Zoe Celesta West, daughter of John Anthony West. Fabio Ricci joined us last week. We had a fun-ass episode just talking about all kinds of bullshit. And we found he's an amazing Trump impersonator. And we had none other than Jimmy Church on last month. Now, Throwback Month, what is that? Throwback Month is us bringing on some of our most beloved guests for the last several months to continue discussions that we cut short due to time, aka the show went over 3 hours and people had to go to sleep or what have you. And for this coming month, I wanted to be able to describe it to all of you individuals and denizens out there. I'm stalling for time to try and bring up this image, but my laptop is freezing. God damn it. Listen to the music. It's good. It's very good. Come on, for crying out loud. Anyway, next week on the show, Thursday at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, we have none other than Edward Nightingale, a Den of Lore favorite. We're going to be talking about the golden ratio template as it relates to the Vatican and the Knights Templar, which I know we only touched on in a couple of episodes. So you got to check this shit out. Just let me fucking. My internet is actually acting up. I can't even bring up my internet is out. That's fantastic. Lovely. Okay, we're going to our... One second here. Okay, so June 1st, Edward Nightingale. June 8th, Rocky Stucci, who, if you listen to or follow The Hangover, we brought him on with past guest alum Scotty Roberts, and we discussed a lot of politics. This is gonna be like a conspiracy-heavy episode. We want to be able to delve into the alt-right mind of what's going on in the United States. And we'll see how that episode goes. I think it's going to be like one of the most riveting episodes we'll have that month. Laird Scranton, the man, the myth, the legend himself, joins us June 15th. We're going to be continuing discussion on Göbekli Tepe, cosmology as a profession and a cosmological comparison as a field, and the problems he's run into. And I'm also plumbing his Facebook updates for topics of discussion, and there are a lot. So if there's one episode to catch next month, catch that one. On Saturday, June 24th, this is originally going to be a Thursday episode, but Charles has a new contract, which is from whenever time till 8 o'clock. So we're going to do it on Saturday. Charles P. O'Dale, which is one of our top episodes ever. We are going to be continuing the discussion on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, as well as just trying to avoid comet impacts as a necessity of life, as well as the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada's 2017 General Assembly, which myself and Big Sexy Alex will be joining for the Crater Tour, which we'll hopefully be able to have live, I think, with internet the way that it is right now with our YouTube, as well as what this all means towards Canada's 150th birthday, and, so forth. Charles and I finished off a full 2/6 of 14-year-old Glenn Fiddick the last time he was on, so expect a good show for that one. For Thursday, June 29th, Ross motherfucking Hamilton is going to be back on the show. Listen to episode 9. Just drop whatever you're doing, go listen to episode 9, because we did not really get into the Giants discussion, or as he likes to mention them, the men of renown in North America. We're going to be all over that subject like Oprah on a baked ham.
I can't wait for that.
Or on Trump on a scandal, or Jeff Sessions on a non-recusal, or I'm trying to think here, or Putin on a journalist he has to kill for whatever reason, or whatever. And anyway, there's going to be some crazy shit going down that episode, so fucking tune in. June 29th. We have not released the information for our Masters episode, although I do know that this person who is coming on may be one of the top mysticists in all of North America. That's all I'm going to say right now. And we're going to go very deep in terms of mysticism, magic, self-initiation, you name it. So that'll be announced to our Masters soon. As you all know, that we're going to be having a Masters episode this Saturday around 11 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'll be releasing the information to the Masters within the next day or so, depending on what my wife needs me to do for yard work, etc. that day. But we will make sure it will happen in terms of a presentation for you, ladies and gentlemen. That is the end of my announcements for the day. Nico, Big Sexy Nico.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
How did you find your first time in the den?
I found it was pretty exciting. I think I did a lot more. Well, I know I did a lot more listening than I did talking. It was kind of surreal. Yesterday, Gordon White was someone whose books I read and someone whose podcast I listened to, and today I heard him say my name, so that was kind of exciting. I think maybe I'd like to come back if I'm invited, and I think I have some more listening to do. You have many episodes that I have not listened to. Really, I've only listened to your Zoe West episode, sort of preparation for being invited here. But I like your show.
Okay, now is looking at Denver Michaels here, who was on our Skype page. Is he not the most sexy individual from Virginia you've ever seen in your life?
It's the hat.
It's the hat.
I love it.
It's the fucking hat.
The Cabela's hat. Chicks dig Cabela's hats.
Oh my God in heaven, ladies and gentlemen, this has been episode 39 for the Den of Lore. I have to say to all of you people, and Denver is, Kevin from Nebraska saying, y'all keep sending in that peanut butter. Oh my God, he's trying to sabotage the competition.
Enough with the peanut butter already.
I love it. This show is interactive. This is why I love this show, because I get to comment on our YouTube listeners as the show happens. Now, Denver, I got to say right out, flat out, you're an amazing guy. Thank you very much for being part of the show and for enriching our lives, because honestly, the Den of Lore would not be what it is without you being like straight up. It's like Denver Michael's Den of Lore. It's it's part and parcel. People expect Denver in that beautiful face of his.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It's
an awesome show. I mean, it just is.
I'm feeling the vapors right now.
It is warm in here.
It is warm in here. So, Denver, thank you very much for coming on tonight. I'm gonna put this back onto. I gotta find where the hell is that. Oh, there we go. I'm going to put this back onto no guest mode. And Denver, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to play your favorite outro music, I think. Possibly. Let me just turn this down. This is a song called Hex from Forget the Whale. They sound like a hipster band, but that's okay. Alright, that's pretty fucking jiving. So, ladies and gentlemen, next week, this time, 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, 5:30 Mountain, 4:30 Pacific. 7:30 Central. Sorry, 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, 6:30 Mountain, 5:30 Pacific. We're going to have none other than the man himself, Edward motherfucking Nightingale, on the show to discuss some heavy ass shit. I've had a little bit too much scotch tonight, I think, but that's fine, because this is the whole show. This is the Den of Lore. I am Chris George Zugert, your host, signing off.